I'm Andrew Basiago, and this is the Quest for Truth.
And my name is Aaron Moriarity. I will be your moderator. And welcome back, Andy. We've been missing you.
Well, thank you. That's very kind.
First off,
by the way, Aaron, I know people have been asking about me.
Okay.
And I'm in a period of my life that I'm calling the interregnum. Okay. I basically have lost a lot of vision, which someday will be brought back with some of the amazing bionic vision devices that are being developed for the eye. And I'm also in stage 4 kidney failure, but we're only about a year or two away from a robotic kidney. So while it may seem serious, I'm talking about these disability issues that are affecting my life right now during this interregnum. I want all of my friends, my fans, my supporters, all the nice people who asked about me to know that we are on the threshold of a bionic revolution. And as somebody born in 1961, who is now 60 years old, I'm going to be in the front of the line, which I think is just a karmic payoff for having gotten these problems from being in the front of the line on things like teleportation and Mars visitation. So don't worry. I'm in it for the duration. From my perspective, I'm about halfway through. In fact, I don't want to give the specific date of my passing that I found out about when I was in Pegasus, but I got a lot of living to do, and I shall. So thank you to all of the people who contacted you about, how is Andy B doing? And I just want those people to know I'm doing fine. Tonight I'm going to talk about some of the things we can all do to live in a more healthy way and extend our longevity and the quality of our lives in that longevity.
Awesome. And, myself and my viewers, of course, are sending their prayers and healing energy to you to get all of those things fixed ASAP.
Well, I feel it. And, I'm doing everything to basically be in better health than, for example, before I developed my kidney problems. I would like to say that diabetes caused all of this, because diabetes affects 4 systems in the body: the eyes, the heart, the blood vessels, and the kidneys. But as you may recall from my account of being in Project Pegasus, when I went to New Mexico in 2003 to meet with various U.S. government officials, some of them who had served on Project Pegasus, Jack Pruitt met me at the old Sweeney Auditorium in Santa Fe, and he advised me in 2003 that all of the children who had Tesla teleported, literally myself and my peers and 139 other kids in Project Pegasus, the U.S. government knew that all were developing a disease that mimicked diabetes. So as I was bringing all my information forward over the last 20 years or so, I was fighting metabolic syndrome, but it wasn't diabetes. It was a disease that mimicked diabetes. So now I'm forced to basically treat some of these problems as if it had been diabetes to begin with, but I am not diabetic. In fact, my hemoglobin A1C for like the last 4 or 5 years has been in the 4s.
Wow.
Which is not even pre-diabetic. But we are going to be discussing diabetes tonight because, I fought that battle of metabolic syndrome from the program. And too many Americans are developing diabetes. It's a national crisis, basically. So we're going to talk about that tonight.
Okay. Great. I know you've also been talking about the Truth Movement. And of course, being one of the founding members of the Truth Movement, you've got a lot to say about it because you're one of the people who started it and one of, well, actually the most believable story because of all the details you give, the names, the dates, the people, and all the witnesses that came forward. So that's
I like to quote Mark Twain that always tell the truth, therefore you don't have to remember anything.
Right.
And that's the principle that I've applied. Everything I've shared publicly has been true. There's been no embellishment, no exaggeration, no fantasy, no delusion. And these were all things I spent years checking out. My dad first asked me to tell the story of what we did in Project Pegasus in 1989.
Wow.
Before he then passed away several months later. And so I spent like a good 10 years between like 1990 and the year 2000 just calling people around the country who had been in the project and writing down what I remembered and then comparing it to what people were telling me, and traveling places that my dad and I had visited in New Jersey, Ohio, and New Mexico on the project. I obviously didn't have the technology at that point to time travel and check these places out, but I began, meticulously writing down what I remembered and doing phone calls and site visits and so forth. And it wasn't really until 2004 that I began giving public talks about what I did in Project Pegasus. Then in 2009, I brought forward what I experienced in the what we're calling Project Mars, but it really didn't have a name, which was the U.S. Aeronautical Repositioning Chamber visits to the Red Planet, which involved a lot of Americans. I mean, I did have a sort of a key role in Pegasus, but I was by no means the only American, male or female, men and women, going to the Red Planet during those years. In fact, William Whitecrow, one of my fellow astronauts, told me there was as many as 1,500 Americans in different locations on Mars when we were going there. So I was just one of I was the third to come forward. It was Michael C. Ralph, Arthur Neumann, myself, and then four gentlemen who I was either trained with, or in fact, in the case of all four of them, I was on the Red Planet with at different times, which was William B. Stillings, Bernard Mendez, William Whitecrow, and Ralph Kennedy Johnston Sr., Ken Johnston, Dr. Ken Johnston, who worked on Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Skylab, the Space Shuttle, and has all the signatures of, known astronauts that the space program talked about, and we all heard their names. Mm-hmm. Ken sent me a document signed by 57 of them, and you can't fake that kind of data, right? I spent like from 2009 and then for about 5 years bringing forward those people. I had hundreds of discussions with those gentlemen, Stillings, Mendez, Whitecrow, and Johnston. I came after Ralph and Neumann, but I did affirm the apparent truth of their claims because they were very accurately describing the arc, the jump room or space elevators that we were using to get there. And so I believe them. But then what happened is, and I think it's going on in the truth movement in general, that after a group of individuals come forward and share secrets with the public, it creates such interest on radio and on the internet and so forth, and sometimes it's covered on television, that there's a pattern whereby a number of untoward things then happen. People make up accounts. They have a kind of a psychological issue where something happened to somebody else, so they believe it happened to themselves. Some may be disinformants who are trying to conceal the three things that the intel agency and the military tries to prevent from being known, which is the existence of a secret project, who served on it, and what technologies they either developed in the program or used in the program that are still secret. And so my position, I know people might disagree with me. I never wanted to become a skeptic in the Phil Klass type of sense of that word, the negative sense of that word, regarding the later claimants after the seven of us came forward, as well as Laura Eisenhower, who confirmed a number of things about her family's involvement in the program. And I went to Mars one time with her aunt, Mary Jean Eisenhower. So Laura was telling the truth when she talked about going back and forth to Mars via ARC, and admitted to me that, yes, my Aunt Mary Jean, confirmed that she was one of the jumpers, one of the astronauts going there. But she's sick now and she doesn't want to talk about it. And she also, Laura initially talked about going back to the second appearance that I did on Coast, where I brought her and Bill Stillings on, talked about being invited to go there in 2006 and 2007 with her two sons. And that was consistent with the arc, being the way we were going to go there and get back from Mars. And it was consistent with the fact that they were involving family members. They involved myself and my father, Brett Stillings and his father, Mary Jean Eisenhower and her. They tried to involve her niece, Laura Eisenhower. Courtney M. Hunt of the CIA went up there one time with me and his wife, Linda Hunt. So Laura's account of the Eisenhower family being implicated in Project Mars I knew was probably true from the very first time I heard it. And it later proved out when she provided details that she could not have known otherwise, like the fact that the jump rooms were called arcs for aeronautical repositioning chamber. Okay, so when those 8 people came forward, there was kind of a moment when about 5 years later, about 5 years after I came forward, it's like 2013, 2014, and I marked that with the account of Randy Kramer. Randy Kramer's account was made up. I interviewed him, I interviewed his ex-wife, Andrea, and I followed what he was saying in multiple interviews, and key facts would change. In other words, he was not being consistent. I mean, if you've gone to another planet, if you've competed in the Olympics, if you've run for president, or if you've done something auspicious, you remember what happened to you. And I found Randy Kramer basically making up his account. But then there was kind of almost a form of science fiction fantasy that emerged with his account, in which a group of other people came forward that I do not believe. I can tell you why. But those would be basically, I'm sorry for the Corey Good fans, but I believe that those people who are either delusional or making up their account or government disinformants, or maybe had ET experiences where their experiences were sort of simulations that weren't like happening in the physical universe, so to speak. I believe that was Corey Good, Tony Rodriguez, Penny Bradley, Jason Rice, Emery Smith, and then Johann Fritz and Tomas Alvin. Now, the reason I don't believe that second group of 7 claimants is specific things they have claimed that literally go to the reason why we were going to Mars. Now, in this analysis, I want to share something with your listeners, which is what I call Paramount factor analysis. In order to discern what's being stated in the truth movement, we have to have an open mind, but we also have to not be so open-minded that, as the Mexican idiom goes, your brain falls out by being too open-minded. And that's what people haven't been discerning about by that second group of 7 Mars claimants who came forward. First of all, the paramount reason we were going to Mars, because with Apollo 17, we were chased off the moon. The telecommunications equipment on Apollo 17 was taken over by ETs on the moon. And we were told, as a country, you've sent about 5 or 6 missions here. 12 of your men have walked on this planetoid here, this moon, but do not come back. Okay? According to Ralph Kennedy Johnson Sr., who I know served on Mars because I remember what we did together, there have been off and on about 6 ET species on our moon. So when Courtney M. Hunt of the CIA, when I asked him, well, Court, why do I have to go to Mars? I never wanted to become an astronaut. I want to become a journalist and a lawyer. And I talked about some of the things I've since done, right? Mm-hmm. And I said, why do I have to go? And it seems like there's a distance to go. It's such a long way to go and so dangerous. And he said, Andy, because the survival of the human race on Earth depends on it. Mm-hmm. And I kind of said, me, Cohen? And he said, no. Young Americans like yourself being willing to go. Okay. So that dovetails with our awareness that the reason we were going to Mars was because our moon was occupied and we were blocked from landing on it. Okay? Now, when that second group of Mars claimants claim they've been on the moon, I don't believe they can be telling the truth because we were chased off the moon. And that's why we're going to Mars. The other thing they've been talking about a lot, which I clearly think is either the copycatism that has affected the whole field, or maybe even disinformation by a group of government disinformant. And we'll go into the creation of like a constellation of government informants or operatives when we talk about one of these books tonight. But they often say that there was a German presence on Mars. Now, we were trained about who we were going to meet there. I was there about 20 times between July of 1981 and August of 1984, a good 3 years and a month. And there were only 3 countries going to Mars, certainly in the 1980s when I was going. And that is our country, Britain, and Soviet Russia. In other words, there were fellow Americans, Britons, and Russians on Mars. There was no German presence. That's why I've kind of farcically named these false claimants Germania. They're always saying, the Germans sent me to Mars in 1963. And when I talked about the evidence that Obama and Dugan and I were shown that the U.S. government has been on Mars since 1964, which we read in the official French External Intelligence Agency briefing document, when we were asked to read about 4 inches of French documents about the U.S. presence on Mars, because we were working on the CIA's threat assessment of the Martian humanoid civilization. They revealed that the U.S. government first went to Mars in 1964. And when I would follow the second group of claimants, I noticed, isn't that interesting? Penny Bradley's saying that she was on Mars in 1963. The problem is no Americans were. Okay? Another thing that you'll find in the false claimants that follow the real claimant is that they talk about going to Mars and other planets via rocket, when by 1976 or so, Howard Hughes, who did not die in 1976, had developed the arcs. Howard Hughes had an office on the 4th floor of 999 North Sepulveda. He would end up dying 25 years after the American people were told that he had that weird decline, mental and physical, and he died like coming back from Latin America, like on the way to Houston or something in 1976. Not true. Hughes was born in 1905. He died in 2001, like 95, 96 years of age. He did not die in 1976. So in furthering the cause of the truth movement, we are fighting against government disinformation that is so thorough that they even made up that whole story we heard back in the late 70s about Hughes's decline and death. I'm talking about, the concern about germs, the hair down to his butt, what else were they saying? That he was eating black walnut ice cream and watching Ice Station Zebra all day long, and stuff like that. That was all CIA disinformation to conceal Hughes's involvement in the Glomar Explorer, which was a dirigible that was going to pick a downed Soviet submarine off the bottom of the Pacific, and the ARC, the Aeronautical Repositioning Chamber, that he had co-developed that we used to get to the Red Planet. That's how I got to the Red Planet. And I've spoken at length with one of the gentlemen we're going to be talking about tonight, one of the individuals, and that's Major General Mark Music, about Hughes' career. And General Music is absolutely certain that I worked with you. Now, that's not nobody who's reaching that conclusion. That's a general from the Air Force, right? And we're talking about off-planet activity. So one of the clues about the Germania, the false Mars claimant, is they never talk about going there via aeronautical repositioning chamber or space elevator or jump room, as it was also called. And that's the way we were going to Mars. Mars is millions of miles from Earth. And we were getting there, when I first started going in 1981, we were getting there in about 20 minutes. And then as Mars drew closer to Earth in its 2-year irregular orbit around the sun and past Earth, we were getting there like in 8 minutes. You cannot do that even in a rocket.
No.
So these false claimants in claiming that, oh, they took a rocket to the moon and they took a rocket to Mars and Siri, and that basically is identifying itself as false. We needed the Ark to get to Mars, unless we wanted to get on a ship and spend a year going there, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm saying is that the truth and falsehood have been competing. I don't know the motives of all of the false claimants. Like I said, it seems multifactorial. Some seem to be lying intentionally, kind of in a tall tale type of cultural thing. Some seem to be kind of participating in a modern form of science fiction fantasy. Some seem truly delusional. Some could be government operatives. And some may have that mental disorder that Dr. Sasha Lessin, who was trained by and whose PhD in anthropology from UCLA was granted by Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson, two of the greatest anthropologists in American history, or world history. Sasha told me about the fact that there is a mental disorder that where some people hear somebody else's account of something, they not only start repeating it as if it happened to them, but they believe it happened to them. I mean, so I've compared these people kind of like to that guy who came into the Olympic Stadium in Munich in 1972, and he hadn't run the marathon, but he just put on a shirt and a number, and he ran through the causeway into the stadium and acted like he had just won the Olympic marathon. Okay, that is what I think of these false claimants on Mars. There are brave American men and women who were going there now over 40 years ago, almost 50 years ago. And there are a number of people who have just made up their accounts. Well, I did it too. It's a kind of a me tooism. So anyway, we're going to talk about the fact tonight that when I started to reflect on this problem in the truth movement, particularly germane to the Red Planet, which I was proud to have gone to, and I had been told, that I had won the Space Medal of Honor, first of all, by going, as all the jumpers had, supposedly, and then definitely after I saved Bernie Mendez's life on the surface. So I was really bummed when the false claimants started proliferating, for whatever reason. I'm not a psychiatrist. I have my theories, but I'm not sure why every one of them has been saying what they've been saying. I think it may be that disorder that Sasha Lessin talked about. But believe me, I saw Jean-Claude Keely skiing when I was a kid, and I've gotten on the slopes once, and I'm a very good water skier, but I'm a terrible snow skier. And just because I saw Jean-Claude Keely, I didn't believe that I was a great downhill racer. Okay. So anyway, whatever caused those people, I really started to get bummed about the fact that my whole multi-year effort to bring the truth out about Mars was being confused with, not with truth, but with falsehood. I mean, I have to call something what it is. So I was really bummed. And so I started thinking about the truth movement in general. And then I started realizing that I had 10 friends and colleagues who had written rather high-quality, fascinating works where they've really kept an open mind, but not so open that they let their brain fall out. And most of these people became friends of mine or were friends of mine when they wrote the books. And so, I called you and we agreed on the show tonight because, in fact, if you look at the separate books that have been done by people not concerned in telling stories of their experiences, but just doing deep political, ethical journalism, basically, there are some remarkable books that have come out that we can talk about tonight, or will be talking about tonight, that really conceptualize, our lives as trailing edge baby boomers, for sure, in the areas of rock and roll and nutrition and space and politics and so forth. And those are the 10 we're going to talk about tonight. I'll say a little bit about each author, how I met them, what I knew about them, and explain why I think these 10 works are really pretty much admirable seminal works in the truth movement. I was reminded of Jim Morrison's, I met Jim in 1969 in Albuquerque at the El Toro bar, which was like the hottest bar in Albuquerque during those years. I was just there, like drinking a grape knee-high, you know. And I published that conversation I had with Jim Morrison. But what I'm reminded of when I think of these fellow writers and friends who have done these great works in the truth movement, I'm reminded of Jim's lyric. I think it was, I love the friends that I have gathered, or we have gathered on this thin raft. We have constructed pyramids in honor of our escaping. That's kind of how I view these people. I mean, they've really resolved a number of significant public controversies, and that's hard to do. That's what I've spent the last 30 years doing. It's tough. People attack you. They make up false claims about you. They say there's the kind of the reductio ad absurdum if, like Cliff High, for example, in my time travel experience. He said, well, because time travel doesn't exist, Andy must be delusional. Well, wait a minute. My dad and I were working with the Los Alamos physicists who built the atomic bomb. Okay? I've named all those people. In my book, I'm going to name like 25 or 30 Project Pegasus principles. Okay? I have described specific things by people like Dr. Edward Teller, Dr. Harold Agnew, and the other people we worked on in Project Pegasus. So when you make up your mind and then try to prove something, or particularly try to disprove something, that is not truth. That is not true discernment. That's just a person reifying their own beliefs. And that is, for a large part, many doctors in our society, many lawyers, many PhDs, and many journalists. They won't be confused with the facts. They'll reach a conclusion, and they'll back solve to saying that because I believe this, therefore this other thing this other person is saying is not true. So we really have to begin to become conversant in what's called epistemology. Epistemology is the theory of the study of knowledge. And so what we have to do in the truth movement is remain open-minded, reach our conclusions about somebody's truth or falsity, basic veracity question, and then keep an open mind in the event that we may be wrong. I've even publicly stated that while I don't believe Corey Good, I'm keeping an open mind because I've met him and he seemed to be concerned with being believed, and he seemed to not be making stuff up. But with Randy Kramer, he was shot out of the water long ago. So that's what I think we have to do is try to figure out how can we be discerning with all of the information that the truth movement is bringing forward, and still is, because of the internet. I think that's a matter of sort of recognizing the fact that we're living really in a time of, an age of miracles and wonders. Like I mentioned about the fact that we're right on the threshold of a bionic revolution, where many people in our generation will be living to 100 and 110 and 120 years just with all of the artificial robotic organs that are being developed right now as we speak. So we're living clearly in a time of miracles and wonders, but we can't be so open-minded that we confuse those miracles and wonders with absolute nonsense, absolute made-up garbage. And that's what the American country was supposed to be about, the American nation. We were supposed to be the fulfillment of the Enlightenment, not the fulfillment of imagination or science fiction fantasy. So anyway, that's kind of why I asked to do the show with you tonight, and that is to talk about these people, how I knew them, and what they've written, that I think is really critical for all Americans to know.
Okay. So these books that you want to talk about, now, before you do, you mentioned one time, I remember you saying something, you got briefed in the programs about the Yellow Book. There's another book that comes up. What can you tell us? What did it look like? Did they show it to you, or did you just get briefed on?
No. We had Yellow Book lessons at an SO night school in Convent Station, New Jersey. What the Yellow Book was, there were two Yellow Books. The Yellow Book process, or legacy as it were, were two books that were written by an ET who showed up. He was basically an ambassador from the planet or star system that the Roswell crash victims were from. He was showing up to pick up their bodies. And while he was essentially kind of a guest, but also kind of a prisoner of our country, he was sort of put under house arrest until we figured out who the hell he was and, why he was there and so forth. He wrote two books. One was about the history of Earth, and one was the history of our galaxy. And so the kids on Pegasus and other Americans, by the way, this is where a lot of the interest in ufology actually was, where the seed was planted, would have yellow book lessons. So for example, one of the yellow book lessons that I had was on the Astarte alphabet. The Astarte alphabet was a Sumerian-based form of Ast-Art, or star art, by which we would be able to point to these symbols on a screen and communicate with ETs. That was a yellow book lesson. So yellow book existed. All of those lectures over at the SO Night School in Convent Station, New Jersey, pretty near my house, in fact, were yellow book lessons. So I can confirm that the yellow book existed. And certainly that the ET reality has been a huge issue of the U.S. military and intel community. As you talked about in the past, my dad designed the metal alloy by which the ramjet was built beginning in 1952 to chase the ETs out of our, away from our planet, away from our near-Earth environment after that famous July 1952 overflight of Washington, D.C. Those were 9 UFOs from outer space, clocked by Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, traveling at 7,000 miles per hour. So the significance of the ET connection to my time travel and Mars experiences is that I'm the 5th and youngest child of Raymond Francis Basiago. He designed a number of things. He got like 4 patents in different things. But he worked on the ramjet at Curtiss Wright from 1952 to 55. He designed the metal alloy by which it wouldn't melt from friction with molecules of air in our atmosphere or molecules of space dust outside our atmosphere. He then worked in repeating Nikola Tesla's teleportation experiments at the Thomas A. Edison Research Labs in West Orange, New Jersey, beginning in 1956, which was a lab that closed in 1964. And there, my dad repeated Tesla's teleportation experiments. Why? Because Tesla had left stuff back in his records when he died in 1943 that we had been studying ever since. We studied them throughout the whole 40s, 50s, and 60s, right? One of them was a teleporter. That was of interest to our military because those UFOs that had been seen over Washington, D.C. in July of 52, they weren't just speeding around the sky right above our Capitol dome, as it were. They were teleporting. They would like disappear and then immediately show up somewhere else in the sky. So in telling the story of Pegasus and Mars, there has always been an ET connection. I avoided talking about it because everybody would always say, okay, Andy, tell me about these time travel devices that were reverse engineered from aliens. And I'd go, oh, come on. The only time travel device of the 8 that I've talked about was the Montauk chair. The Montauk chair was a pilot seat from a downed UFO that we realized could allow psychically gifted people, especially psychic kids, to go to moments in their subjective future. But that was about it. All the other devices were invented by humans. Ernetti and Gemelli with the initial work on the chronovisor, Tesla on the teleporter, Sterling Colgate on the plasma confinement chamber. In other words, I knew from even the time I was a kid that almost the entire time travel arsenal of this country was developed by brilliant human beings from our species, from our civilization on Earth. So I avoided talking about this ET connection. But my dad worked on the ET situation from 1952 to when he retired in 1984. And then sadly, he passed away in 1990 when he was 28. And so there was always a connection to the ET situation with the reason we were seeking time travel, like teleportation-based time travel. initially it was just teleportation in real time. Then they found a way to send you to the past and future via teleportation.
Wow.
And then also completing Tesla's work. So my dad was one of the experts in the quantum access devices, if you will, rather than time travel devices. See, they all were time travel. Some were just allowed you to see into the past, and some just access information from the past, but some were physical time travel. So anyway, I like to use the phrase quantum access. But anyway, so I was really honoring my father and fulfilling his request a couple months before he died in 1990. I would say about maybe, October, November of 89, to tell the story of Pegasus. And I said, why, Dad? And he said, why after all these years? Because he told me to convene a family meeting and tell my mother and siblings, and then tell the entire world, which is essentially what I've done.
Yeah.
500 radio shows, public addresses all over the Western Hemisphere, radio interviews originating in 15 countries, and so forth. So I did what my dad asked, which was tell the whole world. He said, because, son, we were part of something great. And as you know, I always believe we should make teleportation public. And as I've said in so many of my interviews, imagine if you were in London, England, and you wanted to get to Sydney, Australia, and you could get there in 5 seconds rather than 24 hours aboard a commercial airliner. And imagine that pregnant women would not be subjected to things like miscarriages by flying, getting up to that radiation up there in the stratosphere. We want to protect human life by modernizing our culture. Teleportation is a fundamental concomitant of that modernization. We've had it for over 50 years. It gets people places so quickly they would be astonished. And it's been hidden. It's been hidden. It was weaponized. The true history of time travel is it was weaponized. So teleportation was one of those time travel technologies, and it was secreted. So the net effect is we're all looking at possibly really serious global warming, or maybe not. But we're living in more carbon than we need to because we're not teleporting. We no longer need to be traveling by planes, trains, and automobiles and burning fossil fuels to do so. So part of my effort has been as a university-educated environmental lawyer and environmental planner to bring about a better form of transport. In other words, to introduce a form of transport that exists and has been perfected, but was never introduced in the public realm. That's not America. I mean, if that was America, we would still be flying planes like the Wright brothers from 1903, That's not America. America is about the future. It's about making a better world. That was its purpose, being the fulfillment of the Enlightenment. We're going to talk a little bit about the framers tonight. I've got some good sources for that. And it matters, who founded our country and what they were, and one of the books that really explains who they were, which I'd recommend to everybody. But anyway, they were very good men and women. I've been speaking out to try to help the American civilization modernize by implementing things that it developed 40 and 50 years ago. I mean, think of all the medications. I'm on a new high blood pressure medication that absolutely got rid of my high blood pressure. I'm just amazed. It's like a fat-soluble one. So when it finally got into my liver, that's it. I no longer have high blood pressure.
Wow.
So imagine if such amazing pharmacological agents, such drugs and supplements, were never introduced because they worked.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of us would be dead. Just like the fact that I don't really support vaccines, but some vaccines have worked, like the one for polio. Okay, so we have to demand that our government tells us the truth. That is not going on. Now, I don't think that my eyes and my kidneys were damaged because I was a major figure in the truth movement running for president. But we haven't discounted that possibility. I hope and pray that that is not what happened, and that it was that metabolic disease that Jack Pruitt warned me about in 2003. and certainly that I was suffering. But we demand.
Sorry about that.
And our government.
Sorry about that. Okay. Sorry about that. I think we should get into these books now. Which one do you want to talk about first?
Well, the first one I want to talk about goes to diabetes and the metabolic crisis that's affecting most Americans. The book I'm recommending was written by my dear late friend Gregory Paul Kreitzer. Kreitzer is spelled Critser. The first major work that Gregory wrote before passing away a couple years ago, I think he passed away in January 2018, was a book called Fatland. And what Greg Kreitzer proved in his book Fatland, to explain why so many Americans were becoming part of what he called, and still exists, but got worse, the portly majority, the obesity epidemic, the very diabesity epidemic that I talked about in my 100 proposals when I ran for president in 2016, the linkage between diabetes, obesity, and heart disease, was in his book Fatland, which I guess was a play on words of that book Flatland. Mm-hmm. So Gregory wrote a book called Fatland. Cool. And what he showed in that book is that the reason why so many Americans were starting to fight the battle of the bulge, men and women alike, is the introduction of high fructose corn syrup. What many Americans didn't learn years after Greg published that book is that when we go into a conventional grocery store, not a health food store, not a special grocery store, but when we go into any of the conventional grocery stores that anybody could name, I won't name them because I don't want to be sued by any of them, but if you go in the middle of those stores, everything is high glycemic. There are food additives and high fructose corn syrup and so forth to make such foods high sodium, high glycemic impact, in other words, high sugar and artificial sugars, and it's to hook the buyers of those products. Sodium is not so great. Potassium is not so great. It causes hyperacidity in the human body. And the glycemic impact of food, the sugar content, is incredibly serious. Refined sugar is only like one molecule away from heroin. Okay? So the Fatland book that Greg wrote was to say, well, you realize that if you start putting on weight and you become addicted to these high glycemic foods, both natural and so many now artificial and processed foods, you cannot control your weight. You cannot rescue yourself from the diabesity epidemic. You are on the path to obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. Heart disease is our number one killer. Diabetes is so profoundly a problem now that dialysis clinics for people whose kidneys have been damaged by diabetes and other metabolic diseases are opening up all over this country. I know that because I've gone to a particular dialysis company in 3 states now, 4 different clinics. And I've traced where the major dialysis clinics are opening up. They're opening up all over the country. So at the very time after 2016, when I called for confronting diabetes, okay, and rescue people from that very serious illness that damages the eyes, the heart, the blood vessels, and the kidneys, and shortens human life. And there are people who lose their limbs from diabetes. Instead, what America did was it built a bunch of dialysis clinics to deal with the renal victims of diabetes and high blood pressure. We have never created a national movement to beat diabetes. We should have diabetes clinics in every hub of every major city, just like those Jenny Craigs were opening up to stop people from being obese. Okay, the reason is that if you eat the conventional junk food diet in America, the processed foods in the center of the grocery stores, and so forth, and anything with things like high fructose corn syrup, you can't burn off the glucose that's created in your bloodstream. There's only three things we do with glucose after we make it when we eat a carbohydrate. Carbohydrates are what create glucose. Fat and protein don't. Now, when that glucose is created, only three things can happen. It can either be stored as and converted to and stored as fat, it can be burned as energy, or it can float around in the bloodstream, causing damage to those four systems in the body, and that is diabetes. So in other words, all of us, when we start eating carbs, or we have one of those weekends where we start carbo loading on hard beer and pretzels and so forth, potato chips, whatever, we are on the route to either burning that glucose with expending energy, exercise, burning it off, or it's going to be stored as body fat, and we're going to get overweight, or we're going to get diabetes and start damaging our body. So my message to your listeners tonight and to all Americans is we need to beat diabetes, and we all have to become aware of the fact that ideal diets are high protein, low carbohydrate. You recall maybe Robert Haas's book, The Carbohydrate Diet? Well, yeah, the carbohydrate diet was working for him because he was a tennis pro who was doing like an 18, an actual tennis match every day. If you get total exercise by exercising all day long, like let's say you're, a U.S. mail carrier who spends 8 days walking around, 8 hours a day walking around, then you can put up with a lot of carbohydrates. But if you're not, if you're the average American who's living their life behind the wheel of their car, in front of their computer, being a couch potato watching television, like so many of us have evolved into, you cannot burn off the glucose that will either be stored as fat, burned as energy, or become diabetes. So you're on the path basically to diabesity just from carbo loading. So that is an awareness about health that should be common knowledge in America, just like the fact that, after 1964, we all knew that cigarettes were harmful because they cause cancer and pulmonary problems and so forth. Yeah. And yet many Americans don't know that it is the high protein, moderate fat, low carbohydrate diet that is the best for their health, that prevents obesity, that prevents heart disease, that prevents diabetes, may even prevent cancer, because there's been a correlation between cancer, the incidence of cancer, and obesity. More people who are obese develop cancer and die from different forms of cancer. Not all, but more. So Greg Kreitzer's book, Fatland, describes when this national crisis began with the introduction of high fructose corn syrup. So that's my first, I think, major work in the truth movement, in the sense that Greg really documented the origin of the diabetes epidemic and sort of framed the concept that, wait a minute, we used to be a thin country. Remember when we were kids, Aaron, and we would go to like a PTA meeting with our mother, and there might be one mother out of 30 or 40 women who were overweight?
Right.
Now, like 60% of American adults are obese. When junk foods were placed in Los Angeles high schools, I don't want to mention those again because they're private companies that might sue me, but Robert Gottlieb, the legendary urban planning scholar in Los Angeles, did a study of the rate of obesity at high school graduation for high school students in LA who had free food from junk food companies going into their cafeteria and giving them free food to hook them on their hamburgers, their pizzas, or whatever. Yeah. And it was 50%. Wow. 50% of high school seniors upon graduation. I don't know about you, Aaron, but I was 130 pounds and 5'10" when I graduated from high school in 1979. By 1989, 1999, 50% of Los Angeles high school seniors upon high school graduation were morbidly obese. and Bob Gottlieb proved that in his study. So Greg's work is really prescient, and the evidence of all these dialysis clinics opening up around the country is that the diabetes epidemic is getting worse. And if you go to a dialysis clinic, there's some young people, there's many elders, because there's a correlation between old age and kidney problems. But there's also a correlation between kidney problems and obesity. Okay, and that would be the diabetes connection. The glucose is giving the person a lot of fat, but also damaging their kidneys and causing sclerosis of the kidneys. So anyway, that's what we have to confront, that the truth movement has already succeeded in articulating. I think I just did. And by the way, in that regard, I'm warning people about what I call supplementitis. Many, many supplements are being sold by people to make money. They say they know the etiology of a disease and the value of that supplement or whatever, but most of them they're not aware of the particular medical condition of a certain person that they'll say something to. Like for many years in the Northwest, people have been saying Americans eat too much calcium and sodium, but not enough potassium and magnesium. And I went on both of those, potassium and magnesium, not knowing that potassium was bad for my kidneys, and my kidneys were already compromised. So one message I would have to your listeners that's germane to this issue of nutrition is don't listen to people who are hawking supplements as to what that supplement does and what the connection to your health is. Because in fact, some supplements that they're recommending will literally be injurious to your health because of your unique medical condition. Okay? But we can all benefit from a high protein, low carbohydrate diet with moderate amounts of fat. And dietary fat does not turn into bodily fat.
Right.
Carbs do.
Right.
So go low carb and your weight problems will be solved. On that diet, I went from about 3 years ago, from 220 pounds at 5'10", 260 pounds at 5'10", with no starving, no dieting. I just shifted to that high protein, low carb diet with some fat. And I'm talking about enjoying many foods that I have always taken, but I just made sure that the protein was much more than the carbs. And I cut the carbs. So anybody out there fighting the battle of the bulge, fighting becoming a member of the portly majority, as most of us are now becoming, needs to know that. That's why I'm sharing that tonight.
Well, I think I was a little bit more heavy. I can't remember exactly how much I weighed, probably 150, 160, but I don't know how tall I was because I measured myself as I was growing, and I reached a plateau at 5'8 3/4. Then about a year later, I checked it again and went, whoa, I'm 5'11". Wait a minute, that can't be right. I better check it again. I went, wait a minute, I'm staying with that. I'm not checking it again. So I might not be 5'11". I might be 5'8 3/4, but I'm not, so I don't even know.
Right, but the thing we have to get to in America is the same place we got with cigarettes. After the Surgeon General's report in 1964, everybody said, well, I know I smoke and I know it's going to give me lung cancer or heart disease or whatever, but I just can't stop. Right? So we kind of manned up and acknowledged that cigarettes are bad for you. Now, in the area of weight gain, of obesity, because obesity was correlated to looks in the lookist culture that we've developed, which is probably negative. I think it's negative in the sense that it associates somebody's virtue with their appearance, and those things are not correlated. Now look at Albert Einstein. He was not exactly the most handsome man in the world, but look how brilliant he was. Okay, yeah. So what happened was, instead of confronting the obesity epidemic, began to feel guilt-tripped about their weight, and they didn't even know that they can quickly solve their weight problem by high-protein, low-carbohydrate. That's everybody. If that doesn't work, it's because you have an impeded thyroid, an impeded pancreas, an impeded depleted liver. In other words, you've got an organic problem that needs to be addressed more seriously. But most human beings at most ages can lose weight by going high protein, low carb. But because of the lookism, everybody thought, well, God, I'm so embarrassed about how fat I've gotten. Particularly women, because we've been so lookist towards females in our culture, which is very, very negative. Like I said, there's not a connection between human virtue or human ability and somebody's particular looks. And, so we have to basically start talking to each other and say, look, friend, you've got a weight problem. Just like at certain times, some of us have monetary problems or whatever. Right now I'm waiting for the robotic kidney to come along. So I've got kidney problems right now. So it's okay. But know that you can solve your weight problem. You don't have to be guilt-tripped. You don't have to be embarrassed about it. You don't have to feel that it's hopeless. All you have to do is go high protein, lean protein, and low carb.
Okay.
So,
well, that's good advice. And, whenever I hear, you might be deficient in certain mineral or vitamin, I find the foods that have those vitamins and minerals, and I add those to my diet instead of getting the pills, because, the concentrated pills could be a problem too. So that's what I do. I don't know. Oh, I'm recalling Andy. So we lost him somehow. Hello? Well, it says it's calling. Thank you, everybody, for being here. While I'm calling Andy back, it's not going through. I'm going to try it again. That should get him.
yes, Aaron, we lost each other.
Yeah, so we're back. Okay.
Right. An aspect of supplementitis, I call it, is something I've confirmed with numerous dietitians. Most of the things you would get via supplement, you get more and in a way that your body can assimilate through food.
Yes.
So you once brilliantly observed an old song from my childhood, we are what we eat.
Yeah.
We are what we eat. We're not the pills that we pop.
Right.
Now, I worked in pharmacology at UCLA for 3 years with some brilliant researchers, Dr. Roger W. Russell, Louis G. Ignaro, who won the Nobel Prize for the nitric oxide delivery system, Dr. Donald Jendon, who was a brilliant man, so we just read the numbers on some drug experiment, see things in the numbers. All of them passed except Ignaro. And I became aware of the fact that the pharmacological community, the scientists serving big pharma, are making highly specific determinations about specific chemicals that you can put in your body to address certain medical problems. So in fact, big pharma has been one of the great successes of Anglo-American civilization. Countries like ours, America, Britain, Switzerland, and France, and the participants in that revolution. We should be happy that those things have been developed. I mean, my left leg was saved by an antibiotic. My left foot. Wow. It became infected. It was all purple. Wow. Saved by an antibiotic. So a lot of what Big Pharma has developed is based on brilliant research and brilliant scientists. But it's still true, despite that fact, that if you're looking for any kind of beneficial mineral or vitamin or substance, getting it in food is always better and quicker and more efficiently, more effectively than pills, supplements. Why would that be? Well, were our grandparents and great-grandparents even popping supplements rather than eating something? No. I mean, most human generations have been food eaters, not pill poppers.
Right.
So I do share your position that food is much better than supplements if you're addressing a certain issue.
Yeah. Now, I remember.
So that's basically, I think, the significance of Greg Kreitzer's Fatland is just warning us about what started the obesity epidemic and then what we can do about it.
Yeah. So what's the next book you want to talk about?
Well, the next one is by another upperclassman of mine at UCLA back in the early 80s. He also wrote for the UCLA Daily Bruin, like Greg Kreitzer and I did. And that was David Mcgowan. Dave Mcgowan, who was sometimes known as DC Dave, has written a number of significant books. The one I want to talk about tonight is entitled Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. Now, he borrowed that from the Doors lyric, Weird Scenes Inside the Gold Mine. I forget what Doors song that was, but I think it was The End or something. But Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon was about the unique sort of Laurel Canyon folk music scene of the 60s and 70s. What Dave Mcgowan did, and I'll tell you how he got onto this story, which is so important, he basically proves in that work that the entire folk rock culture of the 60s and 70s, except maybe for Linda Ronstadt and a few others, were the sons and daughters of top intelligence and military officials of this country.
Wow.
So, for example, Stephen Stills of Buffalo Springfield and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young in his solo career as Stephen Stills. Stephen Stills was the son of the Latin American director for the CIA. We all know about Jim Morrison being the son of an admiral, but how many Americans know that Jim Morrison's father, George S. Morrison, was the youngest admiral in the U.S. Navy, and he was the commander of the Bonhomme Richard, the ship upon which the Tonkin Gulf incident was based.
Wow.
That got us into the Vietnam War. Wow. So I think what Dave Mcgowan did is, in being such a Doors fan, he asked himself, well, wait a minute, Morrison was the son of this top admiral who had gotten us messed up in Vietnam, because of course the Tonkin Gulf incident led to the Tonkin Gulf resolution under President Johnson, and our staying in the war, which the French had started, and which JFK had said we were going to be getting out of, let the South Vietnamese fight their own war, right? Their own civil war.
Right.
But I think Dave realized, well, wait a minute, if Morrison was the son of this admiral who was so mobbed up in what became of the 60s, the whole protest movement, just the whole thing, then who else of these figures were making songs that might have literally been written by the CIA and the military to influence the baby boomers, which was such a large generation? So, for example, think of a song like For What It's Worth by Buffalo Springfield.
Okay.
Hey, man, what's that sign? Everybody look what's going down.
Yeah.
And there's a man with a gun over there. That song.
Okay.
That was basically an anti-revolutionary song. It was basically advising young people, we know you're pissed off about the war, but do not embrace violence, right? Okay, so Dave Mcgowan studied that with all of these figures from the 60s and to some extent the 70s. Not all of them in the 70s, not the Eagles, and so forth. And definitely not into the 80s, the whole British invasion then and, New Age music then. But we're talking about all of them. Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. Zappa's father was like a top Defense Department engineer like my dad was. They were all mobbed up with the intel community and the military. So Dave Mcgowan proves that in his fascinating book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. There are also some interviews with the late Dave Mcgowan on YouTube, I believe, that are definitely worth listening to because he was a brilliant journalist. When I spoke with Dave when we were in college, it was around 1981. And then as he started to write for the LA Reader, we used to clip his articles about the Doors and stuff because he was such a good writer.
Cool.
And I thought, well, this guy's going to go on to LA Times or Time Magazine or something. But I looked Dave Mcgowan up in 1999. And he was working as a general contractor throughout LA. Like if somebody needed some brick patio near their pool, he would go to their house and make that patio, right? So he wasn't even writing 20 years after he was doing brilliant work as a college journalist. And I said to Dave, Dave, this is really evidence to me that the brilliant writers of our generation are not being hired as writers. And I remember to this day what he said to me. this was around 1999, he said, well, yeah, Andy, because in writing, you're only as good as your last performance. There is no job security in writing. Look at Seymour M. Hersh having to write like 100 freelance articles before ever getting a job with the New York Times. So Dave was basically admitting that even though he was a brilliant writer, he had not been picked up after UCLA.
Wow.
But he went on, had a family, 3 daughters, and wrote some brilliant books, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, and also the book A Program to Kill, which talks about the origin of a lot of these serial killers. They were actually assassins in Vietnam who had been trained to cannibalize the Viet Cong right in front of them.
Ooh.
And when I realized that, when I read A Program to Kill, and I'm very happy that reporters like Jay Dyer and Greg Reese have kind of picked that up from Dave's work.
Wow.
Vietnam was such a catastrophe that our government was training assassins, not just to kill certain North Vietnamese and Viet Cong individuals or targets, but to literally cut off their body parts, cook them, and eat them in front of them to terrorize them. Just as our POWs were often being very inhumanely dispatched by the Viet Cong. So we don't know our own history. I mean, when did Vietnam end? Almost 50 years ago?
Yeah, no wonder those guys don't.
years ago this year?
No wonder they don't want to talk about it.
7 years ago this year, like 1975?
Yeah.
How many Americans know that the Phoenix program existed and we were training some of our soldiers to be assassins, killing village chieftains and so forth, the My Lai massacre type of scenes, right?
Horrifying.
And yet don't know that those very American assassins were being trained and were practicing cannibalism right in front of their foreign adversaries. I'm talking about cutting off a Viet Cong's hand, cooking it, and eating it right in front of him. So anyway, Dave goes into that in his book, Program to Kill.
Okay.
And because of his integrity and the fact that I knew him personally, in the same way that he nailed this military and intel conspiracy, essentially that led to the modern folk rock music of that era, he really showed us just how catastrophic the Vietnam War was, how ugly it was. In other words, there were things going on in Vietnam that didn't even go on in Nazi Germany. There was obviously rampant murder and abuse of prisoners by the Nazis, but I don't know of any account where they were removing human body parts and eating them in front of the victim.
Oh, that's sick.
In front of their adversary who was captured and killed or being tortured. So I know it's difficult to deal with, but it is the history of our country. I mean, I was born into the Vietnam era. I was born in 1961. I was always afraid that I was going to be sent to Vietnam. Some of my cousins who were older were sent to Vietnam. And when the war ended in 1975, I was 13, 14 years old, and totally relieved that I wasn't being sent to Vietnam. Because I'd heard the accounts. One of my cousins had been tortured with a drowning torture during the Tet Offensive. I was terrified that I was going to be sent there. Fortunately, I wasn't. But in the intervening years, I worked to get the VA's principal demographic study of Agent Orange, White, and Blue off the UCLA campus. Our compromised researcher there had said, quote, this is a direct quote here, fear due to publicity is likely to be the greatest health effect of Agent Orange. And I sat down at this PhD's desk at UCLA and I said, sir, I have this book right here, Who's Poisoning America by Ralph Nader. And it says, prior to the use of Agent Orange, White, and Blue in Vietnam, there were 24,000 studies showing that the dioxin being produced by these defoliants was deleterious to human health. How can you say that fear due to publicity will be the only health effect of Agent Orange?
Wow.
So that was my service to the Vietnam veterans. admired their service, but I knew they had gone to hell and back. And I wanted to get them helped with their health problems because of these defoliants that were sprayed all over, all over Vietnam as herbicides, basically to get rid of the jungle.
Right.
And the rampant foliage there that was part of our war aims, right? Mm-hmm. So I basically proved as a UCLA undergrad, when I was writing with people like Greg Kreitzer and Dave Mcgowan, that the study of Agent Orange at UCLA was compromised. And I went on to win the California Intercollegiate Press Association prize for writing those pieces about the Agent Orange cover-up that was going on at my alma mater, UCLA, at my present college at that time. So there was significant journalism going on by writers like Greg Kreitzer and Dave Mcgowan and I while we were writing for the Daily Bruin. The Daily Bruin at that time was the third largest circulation newspaper in Los Angeles after the LA Times and the LA Herald Examiner. So that is why I'm noting the contribution to the truth movement of David Mcgowan. He wrote an incredibly important book about Vietnam, and then an incredibly important book about the actual origin of the cultural shift of the 1960s through music and basically sex, drugs, and rock and roll, with the emphasis being on the music.
Wow.
It wasn't the sex and drugs that was telling people not to go to sponsor a civil war. It was songs like "For What It's Worth" by the Buffalo Springfield. Right? It was music. Mm-hmm. Music is what was reaching the kids the most during that time. Yeah. And we'll also talk about the Beatles, another aspect of that era in the truth movement. That the truth movement's coverage of something important in that time in contemporary music. But anyway, that's the second book. As I would recommend Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon to any fan of the last, 50 years of American popular music. Recognizes that when we went through that shift, we went from Frank Sinatra, Andy Williams, and Nat King Cole, and even Johnny Mathis, to all those folk groups, the Turtles and Buffalo Springfield, that whole scene. That was a government operation. And most American adults, even those who are getting a little long in the tooth, like you and me, Aaron, with that big 6-0, they're still not aware of what that music of their childhood and young adolescence was, where it was coming from. It was coming from the U.S. government.
Wow.
To influence the thoughts, the hearts and minds, if you will, of the next generation.
Wow.
There were some independent talents during that time. I'm sure that, Cat Stevens was a gifted songwriter and so forth. But
I know
there were many operatives in that field at that time, and I know the former girlfriend of Stephen Stills, Jane Cameron. She was Jane of many colors during that folk rock scene, and she absolutely confirmed that D.C. Dave's book of the Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon was accurate.
Yeah.
That the whole field was being done through the sons and daughters of top military and intel officials of this country.
Wow.
And that and the fact that her former boyfriend Steve Stills was the son of CIA, top CIA. So I have a personal friend who knew that scene at that time, who has confirmed that fact. I used to appear under Jane's auspices at the Triad Theater in Yelm, Washington, as did Tina Foster, one of our authors we're going to be discussing tonight, and for that matter, Jane Cameron. And she confirmed all of that everybody knew that the folk rock scene was like a put-up job from the intel community.
Okay.
And the military second. So,
wow.
Anyway, that's the second book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon.
Okay. What's the third book?
The third book is an older book by my mentor, Norman Cousins. It clearly wasn't written by the generation that has embraced the truth movement Norman was born in 1915, and he died in 1990. He was my mentor at UCLA. He wrote a number of significant works, like Modern Man is Obsolete, about the advent of nuclear weapons, Anatomy of an Illness as Perceived by the Patient, which began the whole field of psychoneuroimmunology, and many works. I helped him on 2 works, The Pathology of Power and Head First, The Biology of Hope, while compiling a 21-part, 777-page oral history interview of Norman.
Wow.
Norman was a great American. He was a legitimate peace activist. He was somebody raised in Judaism who embraced all other religions and people. So he was an enlightened, polytheistic personality. And in that vein, being a Jewish kid from Union, New Jersey, Norman wrote a book about the Christian origins of this country. It was called In God We Trust. And what Norman Cousins proves in that work, which I put in the Truth Movement, I still think it has lingering significance, is that with the exception of Benjamin Franklin, all of those famous founders of this country, anybody you can name, Washington, Jefferson, Jay, Adams, just all of them, they were not only Bible-believing Christians, but they essentially believed in the divinity of Jesus of Nazareth, which is to say that you could say in modern terms, in evangelical terms, that they'd become born again or they'd accepted Jesus as their Lord and Savior, but being sort of more British gentlemen, so to speak, or sort of like English-derived gentlemen, they kind of looked at it more like the divinity of Jesus, that who Jesus said he was. And I can confirm that he was. Why? Because I saw scenes of his ministry and crucifixion at Sandia Labs in 1972 that my dad had collected. And also my dad speak of scenes of his resurrection. Now, there are many people who've had Christic experiences. I think Norman's position was, look, if we recognize that we were founded as a Christian country, as long as we continue to practice tolerance and polytheism, we can encourage people to think about being more Christic. What is Christic ultimately? It's being nonviolent, gentle, loving, fair, just. In other words, loving others as much as we love ourselves. The golden rule: do unto others as you would wish them to do unto you. That, knowing Norman very well, I mean, I worked with him for 3 years. He recommended me to be the editor of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist when I stopped working with him. And, he was really like an uncle to me. And we were close personal friends ultimately as a result of that collaboration on that oral history. I know that he wasn't sort of a doctrinaire, sort of dominionist Christian who was trying to prove that, hey, therefore we should make Christianity the religion of the United States. I think he was saying, look, if you admire George Washington, if you admire Thomas Jefferson, if you admire John Jay, whoever, you have to embrace the fact that these were Christian gentlemen. That's why they had such a high standard. So, for example, in public policy, as somebody who's run for president, it's discussed whether we should post the 10 Commandments in American schools. I say, yes, we should think about it. People say, well, why do you take that position? Isn't that establishing a religion or inhibiting the free exercise thereof in violation of the First Amendment? And I go, no more than having the American flag in the classroom does so. Having a copy of the Old and New Testament in the school library or something. The country was founded as a Christian country. I don't think we lose when we think about whether we are a Christic country, whether we are acting in a Christian way, not whether we are born again, not whether everybody with unusual beliefs is demonically inspired, and all these doctrinaire Christian myths that are being shared. Mm-hmm. But just the fact that there was a standard of love for one's brothers and sisters and faith in the afterlife, which the resurrection of Jesus proved. And the founders understood that allowed them to fight a revolution against the British, which, as you know, and we're going to talk about this tonight, the British Empire, at one point, the sun never set on the British Empire, right? They were the power in the world, really from from about 1700 to the end of World War II, really, by one reckoning. So when Moriarty was trying to show that, look, these guys were confident enough to have a revolution, when in Franklin's terms, if they didn't out hang together, they would all hang separately. They meant it. They were going to be strung up by the British if they did not win the war. So I think Norman was saying, look, these gentlemen that founded our great country had the courage to do so fundamentally, not only because they were brave men, brave soldiers, as it were, but because they were Christian men who knew that if they were killed during the war, they would go to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
and not die, because that's what Jesus showed in his resurrection. So anyway, In God We Trust is basically a seminal work about the truth of our country, written by a man born into and raised in the Jewish faith, an ethnically Jewish man, as well as a Jewish believer when he was a youngster, who had the dignity and the capaciousness to study the Christian origins of our great nation and acknowledge that that was really the fundamental input. And he proved that in his great work, In God We Trust.
Awesome. Awesome. And you knew all these people. This is amazing. So you knew all these authors personally.
Right. These are all people I either worked with, either wrote with, or worked for, or ghost wrote for, or knew personally while they were writing or after they wrote. Or appeared in a conference with them, or became friends after they interviewed me on the radio during a conference or whatever, like Brooks Agnew, who you had the pleasure of interviewing recently, and so forth. So in other words, they're all people I can vouch for based on their personal character. Now, what is that character? It's a combination of healthy open-mindedness and not so much healthy skepticism, but what I call discernment. In other words, linking up the dots so you figure out when those who are not telling the truth are lying. That's a major training that lawyers have, and we pride ourselves in getting very good at it in trial practice and studying trial advocacy in law school. Good lawyers, I'd like to think I am one, learn how to
discern
who's lying. They learn how to ask them questions to prove that they're lying.
Yeah.
And that's what characterizes all these writers. They were open-minded enough to do like what Dave Mcgowan did and realize and prove that the entire folk rock music was a government operation, but yet not believe everything. So he wouldn't do something like say, well, all of them were working for the CIA or the Army or whatever, but most of them were. Most of them had parents who were high-placed defense officials of one kind or the other, in intel or military. So it's a kind of what I find so encouraging about this 10 group of writers, knowing them personally. Some have gone, but I mean, Greg Kreitzer's gone, Dave Mcgowan's gone, and Norman Cousins gone. The first three are actually individuals who have passed on to the next world, back to heaven, which is where we go. And but there were all people, or are still people on this planet who kind of combine open-mindedness with common sense, with the ability to ask obvious questions of people stating things that are inconsistent. Like, I would like to ask that second group of Mars claimants, you say you were on the moon, but as well as other places in our solar system, but weren't we chased off the moon with Apollo 17? We are being so deceived. Let me just mention that, by the way, to remain to the sort of exopolitical or beginnings of our discussions.
Well,
I lost my train of thought.
Sorry. Well, maybe maybe they made some new treaty or they got some new agreement to have a base on the moon. Yeah, that could be too. I mean,
well, what I was going to mention, I just thought of what I was going to mention.
okay.
Remember the Bart Sabrell incident?
Bart Sabrell. Oh yeah, when
Bart Sabrell was a man who went to tried to go to every one of the American individuals.
Went on the moon, yeah.
Those 12 men. I think he got to about 6 of them. Who he had them swear on a Bible that they walked on the moon.
Yeah.
Okay. It's my position that we walked on the moon.
Yeah.
My dad worked on that. In fact, he was going to design the instrumentation for the lunar module, but it went from Parsons to another engineering company that escapes me. Maybe it was Jacobs or Grumman, probably Grumman. And so I know the lunar landings happened. I met Buzz Aldrin. I met his daughter Jan. I was on the moon, and I'm a lifelong friend of Ken Johnston. Excuse me, not the moon, but on Mars. The notion that Bart Sabrell was sort of promoting was that if he got these Apollo astronauts to not put their hand on a Bible and admit they have walked on the moon, then they must be lying.
Right.
That we must not have walked on the moon.
No.
And that Bart Sabrell incident, I think it was worked up in a film on the internet called something like Funny Things Happened on the Way to the Moon or something like that.
Yeah.
It's my position that the Bart Sabrell incident with all those astronauts was to create the urban legend that we might not have walked on.
Right.
When the real story was we were chased off the moon. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just cite that as, if my theory of Bart Sabrell's work is correct, I'm not disparaging the gentleman. He might have been working for himself. But I think it's possible he wasn't. I think it's possible he was working for NASA. That would explain why Buzz Aldrin could Edgar Mitchell kicked him in the butt. Neil Armstrong consulted into his faith thing. That's probably a fake Bible you want me to swear on.
Yeah.
And remember Michael Collins, who was, of course, the third guy on Apollo 11, the guy during the command module.
Okay.
He didn't walk on the moon, but helped the guys get out.
Right. Yeah, that was very. I mean, it was very rude to do. It's a very rude thing to do. I mean, they might have just said no because it was just so rude. I mean, yeah, just because they didn't put their hand and swear doesn't mean that they didn't go. Oh, we lost Andy again. I want to take this time to thank everybody who donated today. Thank you very much. Let me call him back. Oh, it's playing games again. I don't know what's wrong with this phone. It's a Google iPhone. It's got a Google eye on it. Okay, I'll try it again. Third time. Maybe that'll work. Well, I hope you're all having a very good evening. It's so nice to hear Andrew again. And hopefully you'll be hearing from him again soon.
This is Andrew Basiago. Please leave your...
Oh, that's his message to me. He might be trying to call us too.
This is Andrew Basiago.
No.
Please.
Well, now you know what his answering machine sounds like. Maybe this will be.
Yes, Aaron. As I was saying, yes, it was rude for Laurel to ask that question of our brave astronauts who walked on the moon.
Yeah.
And who I know walked on the moon.
Right.
But we have to then recognize what happened in that incident. All these distinguished astronauts lost their temper. One punched him. One kicked him.
Yeah.
How often does that happen? That an astronaut or other public figure
Never.
of considerable rank kicks somebody when they ask them to do an interview or just
Never.
Put their hand on a Bible and state they really were on the moon? What I'm saying is that was such clever disinformation. At least that's my theory of the Bart Sibrel work. It was such clever disinformation that it disguised the real question. This is what I call the Paramount factor. The Paramount factor analysis of that incident is that the same one that we apply when we're asking why were we sent to Mars. We were chased off the moon. So they were trying to create a kind of a foo-furrow about the fact that they didn't walk on the moon, and the astronauts seemed to be revealing that. But in the very process of doing that, they were concealing the fact that we were chased off them. That's why we hadn't gone back. We were just going there for 3 years, 1969 to 72. 6 missions, 12 American. 10 walked on the moon. Why didn't we go back? It's been what, almost 50 years. It's been this year. It's been 50 years since we were last on the moon. Why didn't we go back? That was the real question, and that's the question I believe they were obscuring by staging the Bart Sibrel incident. Okay. Now, he has no need to sue me. I'm not saying he was lying. I'm not saying he's an intelligence operative. I'm just saying that I think there is a colorable claim that that's what the incident he sponsored was doing. It was obscuring the actual question, the question that all decent Paramount factor analysis should lead to. Why didn't we go back to the moon? Why did we go to Mars instead? Why did we never go back there? We were chased off the moon. And that's what the Sibrel incident was obscuring.
It could be.
You know, other countries were saying, "Oh, we never went to the moon. It's impossible."
Right.
But after the Bart Sibrel incident, where people are saying, "You know, I think we really didn't go to the moon." I used to have these conversations with people.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
I would say, "Oh, you think the FBI sent 2 special agents to Morris Plains, New Jersey, to question my dad for about 3 hours, so he could work on the instrumentation for the lunar module, so that we could fake the fact that we were going to the moon?"
Right.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
We went to the moon.
Okay.
So,
what's the next book?
The next book is a book responsive to my time travel information. It is entitled The Chrono Garkey, and it has been published by my longtime friend and sometimes collaborator on a few works, Alfred Lambermont Weber. Mm-hmm. I edited Alfred's book Exopolitics, which essentially inaugurated the modern exopolitical movement. And in fact, I first heard Alfred's name in 1971 when that book was taken out of a leather satchel by my dad. He and Connie Chavez and I were eating at the La Hacienda restaurant in Albuquerque, Old Town Albuquerque. In fact, if people know Albuquerque from those years, we were sitting in that garden trestle outside the La Hacienda. There were some seats there. And they had the book from 2005 that I would work on with Alfred. So when I was helping Alfred edit that book, and I also wrote an appendix where I provide statements by about 20 prominent world citizens about the ET situation. I mean, Prince Philip and a bunch of them. I think some of the astronauts were in that collection. Talking about ET, right? Mm-hmm. Alfred and I knew that I had been in the presence of the very book that I had book designed for him and edited for Alfred when we were working on it. So we were the first team of a writer and an editor to be where the editor was in the presence of the book that the writer would later write. That was what, 71 to 05 was what, 34 years. And Connie Chavez said to my dad, "Do we know who Alfred Lambermont Weber is?" And talked about what was in that book. Now that created, working on that book forged a friendship, an allyship with Alfred. I haven't agreed with all of his conclusions. When I finally read the Chrono Garkey, I probably won't agree with all of his conclusions about time travel. But his book, The Chrono Garkey, is basically responsive to my Pegasus information. In fact, he dedicates the book to me, which I'm very honored by and very grateful for his kindness in dedicating the book to my truth campaign about time travel. Mm-hmm. The phrase Chrono Garkey that forms the title, The Chrono Garkey, I believe is a combination of chrono or time and oligarchy. Yeah. It's Alfred's position that as a result of the development of time travel, the permanent secret government, if you will, the deep state, has been using time travel to control us, to manipulate us, to perform sort of abuses of power by the intel community, and maybe even to assassinate people. I don't know if he talks about that in the book, but I've suggested that maybe people like John Lennon were shot because of what they were planning to do. And understanding what they were planning to do wasn't gotten by listening to their phones. It was gotten via quantum access, what they were going to do in the future. So anyway, I think the Chrono Garkey is at least the first written work responsive to my material that does what Einstein called significance thinking about what I've shared. And I think that credit goes to Alfred. I mean, I'm a little bit, I wouldn't say I'm unhappy, but I recognize the fact that his book is somewhat preemptive of my memoir about Pegasus. But it doesn't matter. All information is good. And all coverage by a public figure is a benefit. All publicity, if you will, is good. All coverage is good. So Alfred has really done me a major task in nailing down the fact that it ain't just about time travel. It ain't just about my desire to publicize the advent of teleportation and how that could solve our environmental problems, or a lot of them. It is the fact that we have to start asking, how has the permanent secret government, the Donald Rumsfelds, if you will, the future presidents who are being apprised of their presidency years in advance. And I know that, and I share that information with Alfred, because I was in the presence of both Bushes, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama years and years and years before they even ran for president. And they had been apprised of their future presidency. So extrapolating from that kind of data, Alfred has basically said, well, look, we have to really conclude here that they're using time travel to manipulate us and control us. And that's the pro-social, truth-oriented nature of the Chrono Garkey as a book, even if when I read it, I find that I don't agree with all of Alfred's conclusions. One of the impediments to a Chrono Garkey per se, a rule by secrecy exploiting time travel, is that when you go back in the past or the future, retrocausation and protocausation don't allow you to change what happens. Okay. For example, if you go back in the past to change the past, you already are in the past and you're actually fulfilling the past. And the opposite is true with the future. So if somebody, if Barack Obama went to, like, let's say somebody like David Axelrod, Mr. Axelrod, I want you to help me get elected president. And I want you to know that the CIA and the military have told me that I'm a future president, that I'm going to win this 2008 election. If Barack Obama was destined to be president in 2008, he could tell David Axelrod that, so David Axelrod would join his campaign and help him get elected president. So you can fulfill the future based on prior knowledge of the future, just like you can fulfill a past event by going back in time. But you can't change a past or future event by accessing it. And this has been discussed recently, even on Alex Jones' show, InfoWars. And I wasn't on it, but I hasten to add, anybody who explores this issue, that you cannot change the past or future based on quantum accessing it or even going with it. You can only fulfill it. Mm-hmm. So yes, Axelrod could have said, okay, Barack, I'll join your campaign and I'll make you president. But he couldn't have said, tough darts, I'm going to shoot you so you can't be president. If he had tried to shoot Obama to prevent him from being elected in 2008, just like you come back and kill your father before you're born because you exist, because Obama was destined to be president in 2008, all attempts by Axelrod to have shot him before running in 2008 would have failed, right? Because as we found, just as he knew, as was discussed when we were in training for the Mars program, we knew that Barack Obama was going to be the first black president of this country. And now it's history. 8 years. It was discussed right in front of us, not only by Barry, as we called him, but his putative mother or babysitter for the CIA, Stanley Ann Dunham. In our final party before leaving Weed, California, and College of the Siskiyous after being trained to go to Mars, Obama and his supposed mother, Stanley Ann Dunham, were openly talking about the fact that this young man sitting right in front of us, who we had been trained with, knew he was going to be the first black president of the United States. And she didn't mean my son has confidence, or I have confidence in him, or the boy I'm raising as a son confidence. This young man has been briefed on the fact that he's going to be president.
Right.
So I have experiences like that with the Bushes, Clinton, and Obama that raise the threshold question of a Chrono Garkey. That would be the explanation for why when Joe Biden had that surgery, sort of that almost brain surgery on that aneurysm in the back of his brain, he told the doctor, "You better save my life because I'm going to be president." He didn't stand on a run and try to become president. Right. Biden told that doctor, "You must save my life because I'm going to be president." Okay, so the Chrono Garkey exists at least to the prior, not the prior selection, but the prior notification of future American presidents and vice presidents. I also met Dick Cheney when I was on Pegasus, as well as the Bushes and Clinton, and then I later met Obama and became aware of his prior knowledge of his presidency. So the threshold question of whether something like the Chronarchy does exist is yes. They are using time travel to brief future American leaders. So I salute Alfred Lamont Weber for that very intelligent work, just like, in conclusion, just like his work Exopolitics basically started the field and then was elaborated by Dr. Michael E. Sala and Len Kasten and others. So also very honorable, truth-oriented gentlemen. So anyway, I'd like to see, in fact, a denouement of the sort of disagreement between Michael and Alfred all these years. I'd like to bring them together. And amazingly, the next book I'm going to talk about is a book by Michael E. Sala. Okay. And Michael called me today.
Oh, cool.
So there's the universe for you.
Yeah.
And I have to call him back. He left a message on my cell phone. So anyway, I think that Alfred Weber's The Chrono Garkey will probably stand the test of time. That we're living not only with a permanent secret government, but that's a permanent secret government that is using time travel not so much to change the future based on prior knowledge of it, or even try to go back and change the past to try to change the present, but is using it to engage in contingency planning to govern us. And that was not within the contemplation of our founders. In fact, when I met Washington, he couldn't even understand what time travel was. He kept on saying, well, Andrew, if I let's say I journey between New York City and Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., I can walk or I can ride a horse, so I can maybe take a carriage. But how can I time travel there? What are you talking about? Okay, so our framers and our founders, lo those many years ago, did not know that the government they were founding would develop time travel by 1970 and then be using it 50 years later, which is today, right? But Alton's book argues that they are. So in that sense, the Chrono Garkey could be as important to a new American Revolution in consciousness as, let's say, Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin may have lit the Civil War. could be a seminal work that it literally causes us to start a revolution of consciousness in our country that essentially replaces our current government and form of government. I don't want to say a civil war, but basically
civil awakening.
Says no manipulation from the permanent secret government.
Right.
And I don't even want to get into the debate these 2 years about the virus and about the vaccine and all that.
Right.
But I think it was germane to that whole controversy. We are not being told the truth.
Right.
So when we try to embody the truth, we have to remember that we have to represent the truth because our government is not embodying the truth. It is always lying to us and distorting our view of reality. Even the fact that, being founded as a Christian nation, we don't know that my dad and other time travel scientists for this country proved Jesus of Nazareth's resurrection. That was never shared with the American people. I do not believe that abuse of secrecy is proper. That's why I lauded David Icke. I said that David has been to the war against secrecy what William Wilberforce, so he looks a lot alike for that matter, was against the war against slavery. David Icke just drew the line and said, secrecy must end.
Oh, and then the call ended when he said secrecy must end. That's wild. That's wild. I'm sorry that the phone keeps cutting out. I'm not sure what the deal is.
The function of the truth movement, Aaron, is to end secrecy.
Yes, I agree.
And that's why I'm lauding these books and these individuals.
Okay, so is the Michael Salla one next?
Yeah, Michael is somebody I know. I appeared at John Ocean's event with him in 2017. I appeared at the MUFON Symposium right next to him, and Bill Tompkins, Corey Good, and Richard Dolan in like the 48th MUFON Symposium in Las Vegas in what I guess that was about July of 2017. And I've interacted with his wife, Angelica Whitecliffe, who was one of the dive masters from my friend and patron in Hawaii, Joan Ocean, who's had me speak at her events in 2011, 13, and 17.
Wow.
And Michael Salla is a man of truth. Now, let me distinguish what I mean by truth, and I think Michael's a good example of that. I know Michael personally. I know that he digs for the truth. I know from special forces operatives of this country that I know that he is regarded as reliable as a journalist or as a historian, the same way that Jim Morris was. He's in their database as somebody they can go to learn the truth. Now, I know he got the truth about me. After not believing me, he realized, man, this guy's actually telling the truth about time travel and Mars. He was right about Bill Tompkins, because my father knew Bill Tompkins. And I had discussions with Bill about some papers that my dad wrote for the CIA about how we were now deriving intelligence from time travel. And it was not made up. It was actually the future. And they had to respect that fact or understand that fact. And I think Michael was also right in the book that I'm going to recommend tonight to your readers, which is his book, Kennedy's Last Stand, about Eisenhower, MJ-12, and the ETs and Kennedy's assassination, JFK assassination. Okay, now I know that Michael is on the right track with those three things. Andy's account, Bill Tompkins' account, and the fact that clearly one of the reasons that President Kennedy was such a controversial president and got assassinated is he had a major disagreement with MJ-12. He wanted to tell the American people that we're being visited by ETs, and they wanted to wait like 10 or 20 years. That's basically the theme of Kennedy's Last Stand. Now, I don't believe Michael on people he brought into the public realm, just like he brought me and Bill Tompkins into the public realm. I don't believe him on Randy Kramer, Corey Good, or Elena Dannon. I just analyzed those three individuals' claims, and I found holes in them that Michael didn't find. So the reason I'm discussing this about sort of the variegated colleagueship that I've had with Michael over the years is, look, nobody is in possession of the whole truth. And nobody, regardless of their vices, is without virtue. I mean, even Adolf Hitler liked children and animals, right? Mm-hmm. I think was a vegetarian. Okay, so we can't pillory people. We can't castigate people who are simply searching for the truth and trying to arrive at their explanation. What we have to do is remain open-minded and say, well, I believe you here, but I don't believe you over here. I don't agree with you in these places, but you're right, and I agree with you in these places. We can't say, oh, Michael Salla is anathema because he introduced Randy Kramer to the world. I don't believe Randy, say, or Corey, or Elena. Okay, so now my take on the JFK assassination confirms that there was an MJ-12 connection to President Kennedy's death, as well as a mafia connection, a Mossad connection, a military-industrial complex connection, basically the Defense Department, and Johnson. There was a sort of a multi-factorial group of participants in the Kennedy assassination. But what I would add to Michael's premise in Kennedy's Last Stand, which is clearly relevant, but I don't think it tells the whole story, is you have to ask, why did Kennedy go from being a total cold warrior in 1960, when he was talking about the Soviet Union as enemy campfires burning on distant hillsides, to give a speech like the American University speech of June 10th, this very day, in 1963. Okay. The reason is that Kennedy went from being sort of a Cold War liberal, cold warrior, who wanted to be wary of the Russians and Soviet Russians and possibly fight a war against them if it was necessary, to somebody who was terrified that we were all going to blow up the planet with nuclear weapons. When I was working with Norman Cousins, I took Norman's original draft of the American University speech and the very words that President Kennedy delivered at American University on June 10th of 63, the American University speech. And I found that 21 major statements and concepts from Cousins' speech found its way into that draft. So in examining Michael's theory that it was the Kennedy's controversy with MJ-12 and the ET situation that led to his assassination, we also have to factor in the fact that Kennedy and his brother Robert had gone up to bat with people like General Curtis LeMay. LeMay and the Hawks, Curtis LeMay and the Hawks wanted something like 10,000 Minuteman missiles. Kennedy and his brother Robert wanted 100. I mean, it settled for like 900 rather than 10,000 Minuteman missiles. Wow. Now, since Kennedy's death, there has been so much nuclear destructiveness that one Trident nuclear submarine of this country has the destructive capability, if a Hiroshima-sized bomb was blown up almost 5,000 times, wow, something like 4,750 times. This is essentially a Hiroshima blast every day for 13 years. Oh my God. My source on that was somebody I met through Cousins in my work on the freeze back in 1982, Senator Alan Cranston. We only have 100 senators. Cranston was one of those young men who was invited up to Grenville Clark's farmhouse in Dublin, New Hampshire, when Cousins and Kingman Brewster, who had become the president of Columbia University, and other promising young men were asked to, and women were asked to come there to prevent the next war and all wars after it. And when they asked Mr. Clark, Grenville Clark, this great peace activist, why do we have to prevent the next war? He said, because the next war after that is going to be fought either with cockroaches or, if with human beings, with sticks and stones. We will send ourselves back into antiquity, back into the Stone Age, if we have a nuclear war on this planet. Now, since President Kennedy's fateful and terrible assassination on November 22nd of 1963. We developed such nuclear capability that we now have that destructive capability, where just one Trident submarine of our Navy has 5,000 Hiroshimas packed inside of it. And again, Cranston was my source for that. Personally, he said it to my face at UCLA. Now, when I was working for the Freeze. Now, the implication of that, I think, is that they were going for maximum destructiveness in the event that what MJ-12 was worried about would happen, and that is that the ETs would be going for a complete takeover. As I described it with Gary Anderson a couple weeks ago, that is why we will never see disclosure. They're not going to disclose the ET situation because one of the things they did in response to it was to develop a nuclear capability in which we could just blow up this planet. And might, if we had an all-out nuclear war. We might not just irradiate and eviscerate and incinerate the planet and everything on it, but we may literally blow up the planet as a planet so that the solar system has another Kuiper belt or
asteroid
belt.
Asteroid belt.
The
asteroid belt.
The asteroid, right? Another asteroid belt.
Right.
Okay, so what I'm going to be talking to Michael about is, Michael, I think you're on the right track with the MJ-12 conflict that Kennedy had. But I think we have to add to that the fact that MJ-12 had basically advised them, look, we think the only thing you can do is if the superior culture from space takes us over is blow everything up. That would explain the overkill. Why 10,000 Minuteman missiles? Why since then? Why since Kennedy was killed almost 60 years ago? 60 years ago next year, in fact, 59 years ago.
Bless you.
Why develop such impossibly unnecessary nuclear destructive capability?
Terrible.
Now, we do have the ability now to knock down anything that's shot at us, and I think it's the policy of this country not to foment or start a nuclear war. But in my work with Cousins and the Freeze, I basically detected the fact that the California Bilateral Nuclear Weapons Freeze Initiative of 1982 was really just an attempt to put the Soviets on notice that we didn't want to blow them up. It was not a legitimate protest movement. It was another put-up job by the intel community and the military, just like the folk rock music of the 60s. Just like I will predict the last 7 or so Mars claimants have been. That's my number one theory of their work and their statements. Okay, so that's what we have to wake up to as a people. Now, we may have lost our beloved, admired John Fitzgerald Kennedy, not just because he wanted to tell us about the ETs, but he heard what they wanted to do if the ETs land, which is possibly blow up the planet, and he said, no, why select the worst option? Right?
Right.
As Jonathan Shell said in The Fate of the Earth. In the final analysis, we all die, and the destruction of the planet will just be the second death. It'll be all of us dying together if we have a nuclear war. Okay, so that's my theory based on what I learned when I was working with Cousins and working on the Bilateral Nuclear Weapons Freeze Initiative. I think the nuclear overkill was in response to the ET presence around our planet.
Wow.
Just like they keep on doing all these paranormal shows where, oh, a light in the sky.
Yeah.
Oh, look, a light in the sky.
Right.
Could it be a UFO?
Oh, boy.
Could it be a flying saucer from some other planet?
Right.
Look, they've landed. They've been photographed. I met them. My dad met them. You know, I met 2 tall grays under near the Monsanto weapons storage area beneath Albuquerque. Okay?
Wow.
We have known of the ET presence since Roswell, and then particularly since that fateful event in July of '52. That's what, 70 years ago this July, a couple months. A month. In a month, the overflight of DC by those 9 UFOs clocked at 7,000 miles per hour will be an event 3.5 generations ago, 70 years.
Wow.
And most Americans are still looking at lights in the sky on Paranormal Caught on Camera, one of those other paranormal shows,
Terrible.
and going, gee, is it possible we're being visited? We've known we've been visited for 70 years.
Mhm.
But will they disclose it if they've wired the planet for ultimate destructiveness in the event of an ET takeover or some kind of oppression of us if they land, begin oppressing us, enslave us, commandeer our culture, or whatever? I don't think so. They can't. So disclosure will not happen. If they reveal that we were chased off the moon, and that's why we didn't go back to the moon after Apollo 17, then we can say that disclosure is starting. At least they're doing the disclosure that Israeli General Haim Ashed was responsible for on December 9th of 2020, when he revealed that there were Americans on Mars.
Yeah.
That's a start.
Yeah.
By a top ally of the U.S. and a general at that.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not going to see disclosure. The truth movement is bringing about disclosure, but it's also being debased by bullshit.
Yeah.
And I resent that because our survival is at stake.
Yes.
Okay, so anyway, that's Michael Sal's contribution that's most impressive. He is a man of honor, a man of truth, a man of true humanity, and becoming a closer and closer friend of mine, just as Alfred has become over the years. And I think that's an important work. The MJ-12 connection, essentially, to the Kennedy assassination.
Awesome.
Kennedy's last stand.
Awesome. Well, that's book number 5, and we're at the 2-hour mark. We still have books left to go here. Do you want to do one or two more?
I've got 5 more. Maybe I should just speed up and do less cursive talking, which is my habit. But let me just go through these quickly.
Okay.
The next is Boxes: The Secret Life of Howard Hughes by my friend and colleague, Major General Mark Music, and his colleague, Dennis Wellman, both of whom I know and have spoken with on the phone. Project Mars was launched because Hughes did not die in 1976. And they go into that in their book, Boxes: The Secret Life of Howard Hughes. So that is a major victory in the truth movement, that major American historical figure, Howard Robart Hughes, lived until 2001, and he was the director of Project Mars.
Wow.
Okay, so they basically don't go into Project Mars, but Mark has written a foreword to my Mars memoir, and we've sort of, we've correlated or we contextualized the Mars-Hughes connection. It was major. So that's a major work of the truth movement.
Awesome.
Another work that an individual I'm aware of is Tim Cohen's work, The Antichrist and a Cup of Tea. Before going to that book, let me tell you how I met Tim Cohen. Tim called me in 2016. I was in Phoenix, Arizona. And he began quizzing me about what was on Mars. He began reaching out to other Mars astronauts that I know were up there, like William Whitecrow, Ken Johnston, and I think he's talked to Ken. And I know he's talking to Bernard Mendez and trying to talk to William Stillings. Now, he concluded correctly, based on his research into what's on Mars, that William Whitecrow, of course, was originally William Paris, was his birth name, and myself were on Mars because we've been describing things. So Whitecrow's passed, but I've still been describing things that only Tim Cohen found in the Mars data from NASA JPL. There's one particular creature on Mars that I haven't even revealed yet, so that I can write it and put it in an envelope and ask somebody to find it on Mars and open my envelope and say, well, here it is. This is a creature we had contact with on the Red Planet. But anyway, Tim Cohen did an excellent job in proving to himself and others, and I think he writes about in his book Solar Apocalypse, that Whitecrow and I were definitely on Mars. And we proved it through describing things that Tim then proved by his research into the NASA photographs. Originally, based on my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, published in 2008. That was sort of the breakthrough document publication. But Tim and like 35 other people have done major work on Mars. In fact, Louis Reinhardt and I, the vice president of Mars, and I, as the president of Mars Anomaly Research Society, will ultimately be bringing out a sort of a coffee table book with like 35 major Mars researchers' best findings. That's going to be a great work.
Oh, wow.
Hopefully a major work in the truth movement.
Awesome.
Anyway, Tim was also way out ahead on the virus and the questions around the vaccine. He did the best analysis of those two subjects of anybody I knew, any journalist or writer that I spoke with, any doctor, any scientist or whatever. He was totally on top of that literature. And, but he's written a book called The Antichrist and a Cup of Tea. Now, that book claims that the Antichrist written in the book of Revelations is none other than Prince Charles, the current ultimate first in line to succeed Queen Elizabeth II as the monarch of the United Kingdom. Now, I never met Charles when I was at Cambridge in 1994 and 5, but I saw him, and I don't think he's the Antichrist. Now, in a similar vein, there's a man named Greg Hallett from New Zealand who's written a book called Hitler Was a British Agent. And in the same way that I don't think Charles is the Antichrist, I don't think Hitler was a British agent, although they may have had an intelligence connection to Hitler that continued and even led up to the war, or Hitlerism and Hitler's role in World War II. But the reason I cite these two books that address the British is that my conclusion as the 280th American to take a degree from Magdalen College, University of Cambridge, since it was founded in the year 1428, is that whatever love or hate you have for the British, I have both. I admit that I have a love-hate relationship with Britain, the British people, a past life I remember of a life in Britain, so a connection to that great country, those great people. But one that is complicated by my experience at Cambridge and my experiences in England. Britain has problems. But I think that The Antichrist and a Cup of Tea by Tim Cohen and
Hitler Was a British
the book
Agent.
Hitler Was a British Agent by Greg Hallett, Hallett, I believe,
Yep, it's up on the screen.
are important works in the truth movement in the sense that I would bet anybody dollars to donuts that the British Empire is engaged in a multi-generational, multi-decade conspiracy, essentially, or plot, to reestablish the supremacy of the British Empire. There was a time when the sun never set on the British Empire. They owned and controlled India, right? Mm-hmm. After the Raj, as it was called. They controlled this country. They owned this country. And there's a lot of ignorance by my fellow Americans about the British relationship to this country. The British did not surrender at Yorktown after we won the Revolutionary War. It was an armistice in which they agreed to stop taxing us, but we agreed to continue to pay the British oligarchies, the landed gentries, particularly the monarchies, rents. So to this day, the Queen of England owns and controls 26% of our planet, as does the King of the House of Saud, the Saudi Arabian monarch, and the countries Russia, China, and the United States. Those are the 5 big landowners in the world, 2 of them being individuals, one of them being the current monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, HRH, Queen Elizabeth II. I not only saw Queen Elizabeth, but she waved to me while driving past me on VE Day, the 50th anniversary of VE Day in England, the victory in Europe from the war, 50th anniversary, which was May 8th of 1995, right? That was the end of the European theater of the war. And when I looked over at Queen Elizabeth, she smiled at me and waved to me. And I know she is not an evil person. like all these conspiracy theories that she's a reptilian and all this nonsense. Again, that's where we have to be discerning and not let an open mind make us believe nonsense. But I wouldn't be surprised that because of the grandeur and the historical legacy of the British Empire, when Britain was Great Britain, and really the primary country on our planet, that there is a plot by Britain to recapture the prominence and authority and advantages that it once had as a country. So that would be why I would recommend those two books. I don't really believe those two books.
Okay.
I don't believe Charles is the Antichrist. I think that's almost silly. At Cambridge, he was known as a nice chap, right, for studying history at Trinity. And then when Charles did things like say that he wasn't the defender of the faith, which was right above my archway in Magdalen College, it said defend the faith, garde ta foi. Right? Charles said he was the defender of faith. Well, geez, we said that when we become a polytheistic democracy. We defend everybody's right to hold their faith without going to war to them, without hating them because of their religion, without establishing a state religion or preventing the free exercise of religion. Charles was just embracing the fact that all good people, all Christic people, respect other people's faiths. So he declared that he was the defender of faiths, plural, right? Not the Christian faith.
Okay.
And Tim concluded, as a doctrinaire Christian, Tim Cohen concluded that therefore that's another piece of evidence that Charles is the Antichrist. And a bunch of other clues, right? But I know, knowing people who knew Charles and being aware of his reputation at Cambridge and studying his career and what he's been doing, he and his mother spent a lot of their time just giving away money because they have such wealth that, like Elton John at his height, or ABBA, or the Beatles, Queen Elizabeth and her children cannot even spend their money. They're so wealthy. They can't even go to a store all day long and spend their money. They have to give it away to do anything with it. And I saw numerous instances when I was in England of Queen Elizabeth and her son Prince Charles giving away money to worthwhile social causes. They do a lot of that. So in framing my theory that they may still want to reassert the supremacy of the British Empire, that's more or less almost like a cultural overlay, because they realize what a great power that they were and that they're sort of deteriorating. It's almost like a projection of their desire, I think, to recover as a country. But I don't think that means that Charles is the Antichrist. I don't think that means Hitler was a British agent. And we know that pissed off MI6 when Greg Hallett wrote that book, because he's a Kiwi, he's from New Zealand, and he has had, and I've confirmed that he's had 13 assassination attempts on him since publishing that book.
Wow.
So just as the next author we're going to talk about had death threats, Greg Hallett is a champion in the truth movement for writing Hitler was a British agent, simply because he was willing to be killed, to be assassinated for his truth. I was threatened with that when I was warned by the Defense Department not to go forward about what I knew about the time travel devices that I was exposed to in Project Pegasus. You may recall that the guy from the George W. Bush White House Executive Office of the President said, Andy, if you go forward with these time travel devices, which remain sensitive, compartmentalized national security secrets, if you continue to investigate, write about, and talk about these devices, we cannot guarantee your survival.
Wow.
Now, to this day, I don't know whether that was a warning or a threat. But Donald Rumsfeld, who was the defense attaché to Project Pegasus, was defense secretary at that time. So presumably it was Rumsfeld telling me, yeah, Andy, you were in the program, but you talk about it, we're going to take you out.
Wow.
Like, let's say, Danny Casolaro was taken out and murdered for his knowledge of the octopus, right? The whole Contra resupply network and all that stuff. So anyway, Greg Hallett has, according to my sources, not been threatened 13 times. There have been 13 attempts on his life.
Wow.
Involving things like disabling his automobile to get him into a car accident.
Terrible.
So in furthering the truth movement, we have to recognize that some of its leading authors have faced their mortality in going forward with their books. Okay? And we have to admire that and honor that. We have to salute that courage. Now, another one of those individuals, believe it or not, is Tina Foster. Tina Foster is a friend of mine. She is a fellow lawyer here in Washington State. She got a degree at my law school, Lewis and Clark Law School in Portland. I got a JD there. Tina got an LLM, a master's in law. Now, her name is not Tina Foster. So why did she have to write about the Paul is dead, mythos from the 60s and 70s? Mm-hmm. That Paul, the Beatles' Paul McCartney, had died, right, and that had been covered up. Why did she have to use the name Tina Foster than her legal name, the name she uses to practice law? Because, believe it or not, 50 years, she really started talking about the book that she was writing 50 years after the original Paul McCartney died. She was being threatened. Her life was being threatened for proving that the original Paul McCartney did die and was replaced. Her book, Plastic Maca, M-A-C-C-A. Maca or Maca is what the British tabloids call Paul McCartney. Mm-hmm. What Tina Foster proves in this brilliant work is that the original Paul McCartney was killed in a car accident on 9/11/66. Good, what is that, 25 years before 9/11? Something like that. 35 years, right? Something like that. So he died on 9/11/66. He was leaving a recording session of the Beatles, and he didn't see a light change, and he went through an intersection, and he was struck by a truck or car carrying a yellow submersible. That event and the death of the original Paul led to what Tina has described as Paulism. All of those highly imaginative and creative Beatles songs, but with lyrics that were a little bit obtuse, a little bit weird, like We All Live in a Yellow Submarine, or Penny Lane, or A Day in the Life, right? He blew his mind out in a car. And I've always wondered about that lyric. Were they talking about somebody who suicided in a car with a gun, or somebody who was in a car accident? Anyway, all of those weird Beatles lyrics, about 300 of them, I'm talking about 300 Beatles songs, were making veiled references to the death of the original Paul McCartney. He was replaced by a man named William Shears Campbell, who was actually Scottish, not British, who was taller, thinner, a brilliant musician, as represented by him taking over the role of Paul with the Sgt. Pepper album, and then every Beatles song after that, and obviously all of Wings. I'm not saying that the Fall, as Tina calls him, is not a brilliant musician. He, in fact, is a brilliant musician who deserved the Kennedy Center honors as himself, but he has been using an entertainer's name. He's been using the name Paul McCartney. His name was even revealed in Sgt. Pepper. They announced his arrival. Now, Penny Lane by the Beatles, that was a Paulism based on the fact that Denny Lane of the Moody Blues was one of the musicians who was filling in for the original Paul McCartney right after his death. So almost all of the Beatles songs make some kind of veiled reference to the Paul is dead myth or legend. It's not a legend. It happened. That whole thing that young people were looking into back in 66, 67, I was like 6 years old. Mm-hmm. I was like getting my first Beatles haircut at the local barbershop in Morris Plains, New Jersey, or maybe Cedar Knolls. We all were totally into the Beatles. people are still into the Beatles. But everybody's thinking, oh, that thing about Paul is dead, that's because they weren't saying Paul is dead. They were saying strawberry something. No, they were saying I buried Paul, not strawberry something. Okay, so in other words, they were even putting clues about Paul's death in all those weird sound effects that the Beatles started experimenting with. Mm-hmm. Now, why would they have not just told the people, look, our bandmate got killed, it's a terrible tragedy, and he's going to be replaced by, let's say, I don't know, Denny Lane from the Moody Blues or something. Or this gentleman, William Shears Campbell. Why did they go to us directly? The reason, again, is the role that U.S. and British intelligence has been playing from during World War II and after, this whole sort of 75-year period. MI6 apparently went to the Beatles and said, you cannot reveal to the people of this world that Paul is dead because your band is the number 2 source of foreign direct capital investment in this country. When the Beatles were hot, the number 1 source of money to the British Empire, as it were, or nation, was British Leyland, which was, they were making all those MG midget cars of that era, and the Beatles. Just like when ABBA got hot in the 70s, they were the biggest grocer for Sweden, making more money for Sweden than Volvo, the car manufacturer, and a good car manufacturer. Okay, so Paul did die. The current Paul is William Shears Campbell. His second wife, Heather Mills, has stated on British television that after Fall, as they call him, dies, she's going to reveal the cover-up. And this guy is not the original Paul McCartney. Now, do I think that really matters? No. Like I said, he's a brilliant musician. I love Wings more than I love the Beatles, but I love both of them. I'm a child of that era and a young, an adolescent of the Wings era, right, the 70s. But that's the truth. And just for stating that truth and proving it with meticulous evidence. I mean, Tina went to an Italian gentleman who's an expert on facial physiognomy, and he said, look, this is a different guy. Different cheekbones, different distance between his eyes, different height, different length of his cranium. He's not the same person. You can't have such morphological changes during a lifetime. Maybe when you die and come back, but not in one lifetime. So Paul did die in 1966, and he was replaced. And I think the significance of that for the truth movement is just like the Weird Things Inside the Canyon by David Mcgowan. We have to be aware of the fact that these cultural shifts in our society, in our uniquely American civilization, were managed by the intelligence community. And that's an example right there. It kind of relates to Dave McGowan's work on the Laurel Canyon scene. It also shows that we were all being sort of snowed over by the Beatles scene. It was they were literally writing about Paul's death in many of their songs, and it was just a rumor or an urban legend, if you will, that Paul had been killed. I buried Paul. They had all kinds of crazy stories in magazines and stuff that his body had been found and all this kind of stuff. But no, he did pass away, sadly, and he was replaced. So that is the next one. What was that, number 6 or 7?
That was number 8. We got 2 more left.
Oh, that was number 8. Okay. The next one is one that I also don't agree with, but I admire. And that is Charm of Favor, the rise of the Clinton crime syndicate by our now mutual friend, Dr. Brooks Agnew. As you described on your interview with Brooks, I met him in around 2006. In 2009, he interviewed me for a couple hours. We've been at mutual conferences together. When I moved to North Carolina to run for president, Brooks is a resident of North Carolina. We'd get together for lunch. Dr. Brooks Agnew comes as closest to anybody I've met who reminds me of the founders of our country. I've told him that. That's why he was the first person I asked to run as my running mate when I ran for president. The next, by the way, was Chase Iron Eyes, one of the Native American gentlemen who had sponsored bravely sponsored, and at the risk of his own life, the Standing Rock protest. But Chase was running for Congress from his home state, which I believe is South Dakota, and he begged off. And Brooks initially agreed and then begged off because he had commercial obligations that necessitated him not running for office. Now, in that book, Brooks Agnew essentially tries to prove that Bill and Hillary Clinton are criminals, right? That they're members of a crime syndicate. Mm-hmm. I was present in the company of those Angelenos who started essentially the Clinton kill count, going back to like Robert Sterling of the Conformists. I'm talking about the 90s. And I was pissed off at the Clinton administration, not enough to do anything, but pissed off at the Clinton administration because I had been prospected and told I was going to be called up for the environmental diplomacy program of the Clinton State Department, and then they just started coming up with one excuse after another not to hire me. And I was really angry at Clinton himself because I had worked written for Jacques Cousteau and the Cousteau Society. I had gotten 4 advanced degrees in environmental affairs. I could have done that job and taken it right to a Secretary of State position where it would really rescue the global environment, right? So I went through a major head trip when the Clinton State Department screwed me and didn't let me take that job. According to them, it was for numerous reasons. It may have just been because when I was interviewed for that job, I wasn't really in touch with my time travel and Mars experiences because I had spent 15 years keeping my mind busy by getting all those degrees, right? And doing my writing in the environment, which ultimately reached the international peer-reviewed level, even a UNESCO publication. So when Brooks went back and made the case that the Clintons are criminals, I said, wait a minute. I'm angry at them, but I met both of them when I was a kid. I met Bill at a restaurant in New Mexico when I was about 9, around 1970, right after he'd been told that he was a future president. And he seemed like a very positive guy. I got a very good vibe off of him. And then I developed that controversy on your show, Truth Quest, when I talked about the fact that I met Hillary when I was 7 and she was 21.
Right.
And she was concerned that I was a 7-year-old carrying a 5-gallon water jug back to my family at this state of Maine campground in August of 1969. That was the August of, hot August night of Neil Diamond fame. Okay, so I don't believe that the Clintons are criminals, but when I look at my experience running for president and how I had the most celebrated platform of the 1,500 Americans, men and women, who run for the presidency that year, in 2016, which was our right, as long as we were native-born Americans, 35 years of age, with no criminal history, we had the right to run for president. Now, when I did run and published my 100 proposals, it was described as awesome, brilliant, mind-blowing, unrivaled, genius in print, and a life experience to read. But what did the American permanent secret government do? It completely ignored me. I got on maybe about 40 radio shows to talk about my campaign, but I only got on the BBC because as a Cambridge man, I was invited to talk about my advocacy of teleportation, okay, if I was elected president, explaining that great American presidents have introduced new technical infrastructures, like Eisenhower starting the national highway system, which was for our defense, not for our amusement, okay, initially. And I realized that, look, the bottom line is, even if you don't think that the Clintons are murderers, criminals, when you go on Alexa, for example, that information service, you can check out people's net worth. Both of the Obamas and both of the Clintons are worth over $50 million. And that's not what the presidency pays.
No.
The presidency pays what is it, 400,000
Something like that, yeah.
for 8 years. That would be 3.2 million for an 8-year double term, like the Clintons and the Obamas had. But why then should both of the Clintons and both of the Obamas be worth not as much money as Donald Trump, who was a billionaire before he even ran, but public servants who have seldom had any other jobs besides being like, what was Clinton? He was Attorney General of Arkansas, Governor of Arkansas, and then President of the United States, right?
Yeah.
After being chairman of the National Governors Conference. Obama was what? He was a constitutional law professor and then a state representative and as a socialist state senator in Illinois, and then a senator. Okay, how could these two couples each compile about $100 million of wealth? Are you there, Aaron?
Yeah, because they're crooks. I think because they're crooks.
Aaron, I'm not picking you up.
Oh, because they're crooks. Can you hear me now? Hello? Hello? Andy?
I know your position is they're crooks.
Yes.
But I think something even more serious is involved. And that is because there's so much economic inequality in our society, there are even individuals at the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth level of wealth that are cheating when they're in office to try to contest some of the oligarchs that are getting elected now as well. So in other words, I think that you can say, yes, they're crooks in the sense that, for example, foreign aid. When I was running for the presidency,
mm-hmm.
I stated what I thought was the truth, and I still think it's the truth. And that is that foreign aid is a scam in which poor people in rich countries are encouraged to give their money to rich people in poor countries.
Yes.
Now, since then, since 2016, when I wrote that in my platform, we have gone to a country that has suffered a pandemic, a huge public controversy over the vaccines or the gene editing experiments that were launched in light of that pandemic. And I know from my own experience, we're now on the threshold of the bionic revolution with the artificial kidney, for example.
Yeah.
Why then are we giving $300 million to Pakistan for gender education in Pakistan?
Ridiculous.
Is that not an example that foreign aid is a joke at this point? It is a bad joke.
Yeah.
Okay, now why would that be going on? I think what's going on, in fact, and this is what goes to the criminality in modern politics, the representatives and senators who pass those spending bills in foreign aid are, I believe, then receiving kickbacks from foreign governments.
Yes.
Who are getting that foreign aid.
Yes.
We don't have a dog in the race when it comes to gender education in Pakistan.
No.
Why then would we have given them $300 million?
Yeah.
$300 million would build the very artificial kidneys that could get 3.3 million Americans off of dialysis, saving this country $1 million a year for each of those patients.
Wow.
$3.3 trillion.
Wow.
Why then are we giving that away to Pakistan for gender education rather than to the University of California at San Francisco?
Right.
To begin actually building the artificial kidney that they've designed? I think the reason is that the significance of Bill and Hillary is that our our political system has been corrupted.
Of course.
By an attempt to enrich oneself.
Yeah.
If I am elected, let's say, a U.S. senator or vice president or president, I vow that that will be my income.
Yeah.
I've been relatively poor my whole life, and yet there has been nothing that I have not accomplished that I wanted to.
Right.
So I will receive my salary. I think that the presidency or the vice presidency or being a senator is difficult work and it deserves good pay. Mm-hmm. But I won't cheat, so I'm worth $100 million or $50 million,
right,
5 years after leaving office. Now, they might say, well, we get these $1 million honoraria for giving speeches, but wait a minute, those are bribes. I know what the speech market pays. I did it all over the hemisphere. It doesn't pay you $1 million for making a speech. Come on.
Right.
A good fee for an honorarium, that is, for a public address anywhere in this hemisphere is $500 to $2,000 for speaking,
Mm-hmm.
travel expenses, hotel expenses, and a $100 per diem for food. That's it. That's what a life as a public speaker generates. So Obama comes out, Clinton comes out, George W. Bush comes out. It's like, oh, Mr. President, you have to give us a speech. Our company will give you $1 million. No, that's called bribery.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not a legitimate public speaking fee, right?
Right.
So this is a complicated issue. Brooks kind of simplifies it by literally declaring that the Clintons are crooks and that they're a crime syndicate. I think it's more complicated than that. We have to take the money out of politics.
Yes.
Remember that message from Michael Dukakis and even representatives like Toby Moffett of Connecticut,
Mm-hmm.
when he talked about the politics of meaning. He meant getting the money out of politics and getting meaning back into politics.
Yes, that's much needed.
That's what I think the dilemma that we're in. So I think that Brooks's work, Charm of Favor, about the Clintons is worthwhile reading, just like the documentary, what was it, Clinton Cash, I think?
Clinton Cash, yeah. Excellent.
Clinton Cash, yeah. I think those are all worth reading and viewing. But I think it's far more complicated than any particular couple or individual in politics being a criminal. It's the fact that the whole system has been corrupted by money making.
Yeah.
I had no chance against Donald Trump, just as one of my sisters predicted. She said, "Save your time, bro. You don't have $1 billion." That's about what it takes, by the way, to win the presidency now. It's $1 billion.
Yeah.
So the way I view Brooks's work, Charm of Favor, is, yeah, we have to take the money and criminality out of politics, and it goes far beyond the Clintons.
Mm-hmm.
When I met them as a kid, they were both nice young people, very bright, very energetic, very humane. I don't know how they've been corrupted as they've aged.
Mm-hmm.
I hope for their sake they haven't been, but there have been a lot of deaths around them that need to be explained.
Yeah.
But anyway, the issue is not their criminality or greed. It's the fact that the whole system has been undermined by what Alexander Hamilton called faction. What faction is a group of some Americans ruling everybody else.
Yeah.
And that has happened. Yeah. The corrupt, the criminal, and the wealthy have been completely controlling our civilization. So I support my friend Jan Friedman's proposal to get rid of the political parties. That's a major problem that he addresses in what I'm calling the Friedman Plan. Mm-hmm. For Jan's yeoman work in framing that problem and that need of what we should do. Mm-hmm. We need to get rid of the political parties, give campaign financing to candidates, and let anybody who's legally entitled to run for these offices the opportunity to run and be on a website on the internet and have a certain limited number of commercials so that every American who wants to serve can get the chance to serve. Mm-hmm. Not the wealthy, not the criminal, not the cheaters, not the old oligarchs and the new oligarchs who are competing with the old oligarchs to get rich. Mm-hmm. And look at how long these people have known they're going to be president. Bill Clinton served as Attorney General and then governor of Arkansas when his annual salary was about $32,500. So he paid his dues before becoming president. But then he made a couple million as president, but he and Hillary have each made about $50 million since leaving the White House. Does it matter that he might have been on the Lolita Express to Jeffrey Epstein's compound, and that some of his historical sexual addiction might have been expressed as pedophilia, which is wrong and lamentable and criminal?
Right.
I think that's something that needs to be asked, needs to be explored.
Yes.
But what we know about the Clintons is that they're very bright, very well educated, and that there were a lot of successes during the Clinton years. For example, he was the first president since like Woodrow Wilson to leave the White House with a surplus, a national surplus. he made his peace with the Republicans, and that allowed for the success of Newt Gingrich's contract with America. He dedicated more lands to national parks and national forests than any other previous president, but Theodore Roosevelt. So there were a lot of amazing successes of the Clinton years. Bill bragged about those during his going away speech at the DNC in 2000, when his Vice President Al Gore was being nominated. And I remember how he sort of walked into the hall. I think he had a right to brag, because except for the Monica Lewinsky scandal and other forms of sexual indiscretion that seems to have been a lifelong problem for him, his presidency was a pretty successful presidency, okay? And certainly as significant in what America would become as FDR's presidency, Eisenhower's, and so forth, Lincoln's, TR's, and so forth. But I still think that we have to read books that study these funding issues, like Charm of Favor by Dr. Brooks Agnew, because the Clintons and most prominent politicians of our generation have been completely corrupted by money.
Yes.
During the height of the subprime meltdown, I was asked to find $1 billion guideline loan for Richard A. Hayden of Lake Oswego, Oregon, who's now deceased, died in 2012, and his Yale roommate and fellow Columbia Law School grad, Governor George Pataki of New York State. George Pataki, if you study his career, he went from like the Poughkeepsie City Council all the way to the governorship in New York, never making any money. So his college friend and law school peer, Richard A. Hayden, was trying to find a way to bring money to Governor Pataki. Maybe it was a stalking horse for Pataki's race for president in 2016. I don't know. It was never discussed and never predicted. I had a brief conversation with Governor Pataki on the phone. He seemed like a nice guy. And I could see where he spent his whole career making chicken scratch as a politician, as a public servant. But then when I found a $98 million line of credit, his friend and colleague Rick Hayden looked at the company that was going to give us that $98 million line of credit at totally affordable rates. This would be like a $98 million credit card that Hayden and Pataki could spend money on and buy up homes and condos and townhomes and stuff to sell them and get people back into their property so they could get the tax break on the home mortgage deduction, right? So Hayden and Pataki were sort of white hats in high finance at that point. But Hayden looked at Bridgelock, which was the company in Southern California that was going to give us the money, and said, "Why should I accept money from you if I might not use it?" In other words, he was predicting that the subprime meltdown would get worse and worse, and home values would, real estate values would continue to collapse. And I looked at my fellow broker and back at Rick, and I said, "Rick, why did you ask us to look for it for 6 months of our lives?" Okay. So in discussing this problem of money in politics and money in government, I want everybody out there in the listening audience to know that I time traveled for the Nixon administration and was cheated of everything my father and I were promised. I did go to Mars for the Reagan administration and was paid 2 checks, one for $34 and one for $55.
Wow. From
the Department of Naval Intelligence, an agency or department that doesn't even officially exist. Wow. So in other words, and then with the Hayden Pataki deal, I have been ripped off 3 times in my life by 2 Republican American presidents and the Republican governor of one of the greatest states in the nation, one of the biggest and wealthiest, New York State. And that's why I could never become a Republican. But I'm amenable to the fact that this kind of corruption has also been going on among Democratic presidents.
Oh, yeah.
Since I went to Mars, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama have been president. How come they never said, look, we finally have to pay our Mars astronauts? We were promised a salary We were promised a low-interest loan or a zero-interest loan to buy a home in Redding, California, because that was going to become sort of the cultural center of the Mars astronauts, like Houston and Galveston Bay are to the NASA astronauts. Mm-hmm. We were promised cradle-to-the-grave revolving door of government service, wow, like Obama and Dugan ultimately enjoyed, but not all of us. And we were cheated of everything, Aaron. We went to another planet. So when I talk to Democrats who hate the legacy of Ronald Reagan, I say, yeah, I went to Mars for him and he didn't pay me. He paid me a pittance. Okay? So that's where I'm coming from. I have been cheated big time 3 times in my life by 2 Republican presidents and a Republican governor of a major state. I lost my vision beginning in 2016 because I could not afford a medication, shots in the eyes. I would have had that money simply if I had been paid for my Mars service. Wow. So I am legally blind now because of this crisis of corruption, of criminality in our government. So yeah, am I interested in Dr. Basiago's book, Charm of Favor? Sure. Mm-hmm. I've been calling him repeatedly to talk to him about it, and we've had some discussions about it. So, but it's personal. It is not fun being legally blind. No. Okay? I'm no longer driving. I have difficulty reading. Ordinary print. I can bump into things. I can fall down. I have fallen down. Okay? So I'm not bemoaning my legal blindness, but I'm simply letting your listeners know that I am legally blind today because of the corruption in American society. I easily should have been able to afford that Avastin back in 2016 when my eyes began bleeding.
Oh, man.
My retinopathy began causing my retinas to bleed. Wow. And I could not afford the shots in my eyes to stop that bleeding. I was running for president. I had shut down my law practice. And I was never hugely financially successful as a lawyer. Most lawyers aren't. The average American lawyer makes just what Bill Clinton made as governor of Arkansas, $32,500 a year. Wow. I mean, when Buzz Aldrin came back from the moon, his government pension was $700 a month. Wow. Okay. So we have a dramatic imbalance of wealth in our country that all of us have to address. What I'm going to be advocating is a limit to personal wealth. I know that some people say that's bad. You have to let the rich be the rich. But I'm going to draw the line at $500 million. I'm going to call it the Bruce Springsteen proviso. Bruce, who's such a great talent, is now worth about $500 million. Let's draw the line right there. Is Bill Gates worth anything more than Bruce Springsteen for starting Word for Windows? No. I don't think so. Our lives have all been enriched by Word for Windows and Microsoft. An incredible 50-year legacy of Bruce Springsteen and running. Mm-hmm. And so I want to draw the line at $500 million. When we do that, when we elect a Senate and a president that will stop super wealth from being earned, what is Jeff Bezos of Amazon worth? Have you seen it lately?
He's worth more than me.
111 billion, isn't it?
It's worth more than me, that's for sure.
Bill Gates is worth about 100 billion.
Terrible.
That's those numbers followed by 9 zeros. Wow. That's more than anybody can spend in several lifetimes. Why are we giving single individuals that much wealth? It's not a functional civilization when we do. We have to say, okay, here's your $500 million for being Bruce Springsteen, being Bill Gates, being Jeff Bezos, being Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, whoever. But this is where we draw the line. Every last penny earned has to go back to the state to, for example, produce food for children. Something like 25% of American children go to bed hungry every night. That is not acceptable. That is not my America. Okay? So,
yeah.
Well, that's why I'm so exercised about this issue of financial corruption in politics. I would not be blind today if it had not existed. I would have been paid for Pegasus, I would have been paid for Mars, and I would have bought my own health insurance, and I would have been covered, and I wasn't. I was going bare, as they say, where you go without health insurance.
That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing. That's me for years.
That's you?
Yeah.
Well, watch that, because we're getting up, like I said, we're getting kind of long in the tooth.
Well, I'm
60 years.
I'm not taking any medications, and I'm healthy as a horse. We're on our last book, buddy.
Okay, you got it. Okay. The last one is the book I talked about, or the series of books I talked about recently on Gary Anderson's show. And that interview, I would recommend to your listeners. It's on Andy for America on Facebook, and it's on Project Pegasus, my time travel group on Facebook. It is the series known as Missing 411 by the San Francisco area criminologist David Polides. In that interview with Gary Anderson, I went into all of my theories for the pattern of missing persons in the national parks, national forests, and Bureau of Land Management, so-called BLM lands. David Polides has done something very original. He's done something of high public importance and opened up a whole new area of law enforcement on the one hand, public safety on the others, which is that for almost like 200-300 years, there's been a mysterious pattern of disappearances of human beings like ourselves in the national parks, in the woods. And I go into all the possible malefactors that are causing those disappearances in that interview with Gary Anderson on his Night Dreams Talk Radio. I would urge everybody to listen to that, because that's based on me reading some of David's books before I lost my vision, and then listening to every interview he's done. He's done hundreds, just as I have, on time travel and Mars visitation. When I ran for president, I stated as one of my 100 proposals that since the Presidential Medal of Freedom should stand for real, significant, original contribution to our country, my first person I was going to bestow that high honor on was David Polides. So,
awesome.
I admire David. I've honored him, and I really think he's opened up a critically important subject. The most dangerous national park is Yosemite. And we know, for example, that UFOs have shut down Yosemite. We know that there are granite strikes in Yosemite. We know that there are Sasquatch around the Yosemite area, not necessarily in Yosemite, but they've been seen in the sort of middle and northern reaches of California, like the Patterson-Gimlin Sasquatch footage and so forth. So by warning people to be circumspect about, let's say, going into Yosemite National Park, David Polides has already saved American lives. Okay? By advising people to only go into the woods with a hiking companion, a GPS, geographic positioning system, global positioning system, and a firearm. None of the people with those three characteristics have ever gone missing. Okay, so he's already saving lives with his work, and that is great, truly American accomplishment, for which I honor David Polides. So that's the last book I would recommend. It's not just a book; it's a series of books under his Missing 411 series. So that's it. That's the Truth Movement. Those are all successes in the Truth Movement. And that's why I felt so compelled to share them tonight.
Awesome. That's incredible. I know we went longer than you wanted to. We've had some people that have questions. Would you like to answer a couple of questions? Or?
Sure. I'm a little bit tired from dialysis today, but I'd be happy to just go over the couch here now and answer questions without have to follow my outline. Yeah.
All right. This is from Operation Shutdown. And he says, Andrew mentioned some of the accidents, like a child losing his feet. long-term health effects of teleportation. Do you feel that that's the reason that's not being revealed or introduced to the public on a large scale because of this? It might be harmful?
No. I think teleportation is not being introduced because the airline industry, the oil industry, and so forth do not want to see a faster, safer, cheaper way of traveling introduced. We're essentially living in the 70s. That would be my answer to that. Now, the boy who lost his feet, that was an accident because we landed in the old Santa Fe Junior High School grounds where somebody had left water in a public fountain. And by the way, I know who that individual was. He lived right down the street from me. I've reached out to him, but he hasn't answered.
Wow.
He initially remembered teleporting to New Mexico, but then I never was able to reach him after I realized he was the boy who lost his feet. So his name and identity is known. Now, the diabetes-like syndrome that Jack Pruitt warned me about, that I did develop, that could be amenable to food and supplementation to just control metabolism. I've said that if that can't be made safe, I don't want teleportation introduced to move people, just goods.
Right.
Just get all those 22-wheelers off the freeway so we stop having people die in their cars. Right. Now, one of the ultimate reasons why I've been advocating teleportation is every year in this country, we have as many deaths and catastrophic injuries as we had from combat during the entire 13 years of the Vietnam War.
Right.
And we almost saw the universities of this country being shut down by young people who didn't want to serve in the war and were protesting the war. When has any one of our universities ever been shut down about the fact that the 13-year deaths and injuries of the Vietnam War are happening every year on our streets and highways?
Sad.
As a result of something called automobile transport.
Yeah.
It's unsafe.
Right.
And so that's why I spoke about the need to go to teleportation, maybe even if it does give some of us a metabolic problem. At least we won't have our heads chopped off like the original Paul McCartney in an accident on the highway.
Yes.
I've seen so much mayhem traveling all over this country, it really disturbs me.
Yes.
And I think that even, like I said, even with side effects, teleportation would probably be safer than our automobile and trains and planes. Now, planes are a lot safer than cars, but they still fall out of the sky every once in a while.
Sure.
Nobody was falling out of the sky when we were teleporting between New Jersey and New Mexico.
Good point.
It was safe.
Excellent. So, okay, good answer. Andy Paredes asks, hey, Andy, where can I get a copy of your book of your life experiences?
You can't get it until I can publish it, and I can publish it when I'm no longer dialysis. My dialysis costs $1 million a year.
Wow.
If I start making money at anything under existing Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security laws, I lose at least Medicaid, which pays for 20% of my dialysis, or about $200,000 a year.
It's just not fair.
I do not have $1 million a year to get through dialysis, where my blood has to be cleaned 3 times a week, while my excess fluid is being taken out of my system. Maybe about 2.8 kilos of fluid while cleaning my blood, right?
Wow.
If I don't do that, I die. So the reason you can't get my book right now is because I can't publish it. If I publish it, I might die.
Wow.
I've already risked my life sharing all this information with everybody for 20 years now. And so that's my answer. It's going to come out. It's been written. It's been placed in safe houses all over the country and world. I finished my Mars memoir as well. The Pegasus memoir will probably be divided into 2 books and will be about 150 chapters in each book, so it's not too big for people to hold up and read. And the Mars memoir is 150 chapters. I've also written a trilogy about my paranormal experiences, or so-called paranormal experiences that have nothing to do with time travel or going to Mars, and that will come out, as well as memories of my past lives. I've written a book about what I remember of my past lives. And by the way, it was great to find out that Brooks Agnew not only also remember some of his past lives, but some of his past lives on other planets.
Yeah.
I didn't know that about Brooks. So thank you for that, Aaron, when you told me that today.
You're welcome.
But don't worry. The key information about Pegasus I've already shared. And I've done so over and over and over again, like 500 radio interviews, 15 countries.
Yeah.
And what I told everybody in total on television, when I did Jesse Ventura's conspiracy theory and William Shatner's Weird or What, I've gone over the top in sharing my information.
You have.
So please don't take the position, well, what have you done for us lately? You still haven't published your book.
Right.
I basically have shared my book. I mean, Alfred has done a whole new follow-up with the Chrono Garkey based on my information. So my book will come out. It does come out. I know it comes out. I know what it wins. I know what it accomplishes. And it will be revelatory, and it will change the world. But don't worry, it will come out. Yes. It is going to come out, and it's probably going to come out fairly quickly. I should have the robotic kidneys in my system, or kidney, singular one, in about 1 to 2 years.
Wow.
Then I will be able to release my book, but not until then. Basically, my kidney disease cut into my freedom, and that's the way life is.
Wow.
You get sick, you lose freedom. You lose opportunity. You lose some of life's enjoyment, but I haven't. And I would urge others who are ill to remember that it ain't over until the fat lady thinks that they should say.
Yeah.
In sport.
Well,
it's not over until it's over.
Well,
our generation, that of Aaron and I, at about 60 years of age right now.
Yeah, I'm 62.
It's quite possible that we will live to 120. And I might as well reveal here what the date of what was revealed. When I read my biography when I was in the 5th grade from Pegasus, when they quantum accessed kind of like a Wikipedia biography of me, I do live to about almost 120. I passed away on something like April 22nd of 2081.
Wow. Having
been born on September 18th of 1961. So we are going to be a long-lived people. And I'd like to end tonight's show with that, because I want everybody to know that you want to start worrying about your weight. You want to start worrying about your nutrition through the very best food. You want to start not over-medicating or over-supplementing yourself, because we are on the threshold of a new world, of a bionic revolution, as it were, and we're going to be very long-lived as Americans now alive. Even before the bionic revolution started to start, before it began to begin, as it were, the U.S. Census Bureau that predicted that, for example, American women now alive will on average live to 95 years of age, like one of my aunts did. She lived from 1922 to 2017, okay?
Wow.
Now, that means that every American female who lives to 85, there'll be one who will live to 105. That's how you get that statistical average of 95 that the Census Bureau arrived at. So American women will probably continue to be longer lived than American men, but both American men and women will be very long-lived as long as we bring the bionic revolution to fruition. That's why I'm tying my proposal to get rid of foreign aid, not just in terms of getting rid of it, because it's a waste of money, it's unfair and unnecessary, but to take that money and spend it on the bionic revolution. I'm talking about artificial hearts, lungs, kidneys, livers, pancreas. That's what we're on the threshold of achieving. And when we do that, we're basically going to die of old age and boredom at 110, 120 years of age. But that's where we're headed. So I'm very hopeful about the future. I plan to get there.
We're not going to be bored. We're not going to be bored because we'll be so fascinated by your book. We'll be reading it over and over again. And I truly believe the world will change when your book comes out. So we're all going to pray real hard that you get super healthy so that book can come out.
Right, that's the issue. It wasn't my desire to sequester the data. And I certainly want to tell all of the war stories from my experiences in that program. But if I publish the book and it makes $1 million, let's say, right away, that goes right into dialysis. I lose the $1 million, and I lose my coverage that's paying for my dialysis. So I put myself in risk.
Yeah.
And that's something I want to change in government. We have to make Social Security truly that, not social insecurity.
Right.
Do you know that people who retire can make, with their retirement money and their earnings, as much as $48,000 a year? But the disabled who are on Social Security have to spend down, which, by the way, is usually just a pittance from SSI and SSA.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually well under $1,000 a month. They have to spend down to $2,000. So one of the proposals I'm going to be making is to at least raise that to a spend down threshold of $10,000 and still qualify for disability coverage from Social Security and
that makes
Medicare and Medicaid in their state. That's consistent with what we could afford. So we're really stuck in the 70s, not only in terms of technology, but Social Security. I mean, a spend down limit of $2,000 for the disabled made sense in 1970, but it didn't make sense in 2020.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So we have to rectify a lot of these financial problems. They're big problems now. They're literally jeopardizing the great generation that we are. We're the generation that created this computer revolution that's now doing so many amazing things just on the internet. But we're jeopardized by the financial practices and corruption of the government. And right there, in terms of how we're treating the disabled, that's one of the major issues that needs to be addressed.
Yes.
Maybe that's why I got sick, because I don't think I included that in my 100 proposals when I did run for president. But I think it's a significant issue.
Oh, yeah.
Let's let the disabled have $10,000 in their bank account.
Or 20.
Still get their disabled money every month just to survive, just to be able to eat if they're blind or disabled, right?
Right.
I mean, I'm so blind I can't even find my own food in the refrigerator. Okay? Wow. I cannot practice as a lawyer or any other occupation I've ever occupied. I'm still doing radio interviews for free, and I'm going to be able to use a specialized low vision device to edit my books. But my books had to be written, and I had to narrate them to another individual who then was my stenographer, okay? Because I cannot see what's on my computer screen, nor can I see what's in my mail when I pick up the mail. It's all too small. That's going to be 6 million Americans if we don't tackle the diabetes epidemic. There'll be 6 million legally blind Americans who will need chore service workers to help them. They won't be driving. Many will be in dialysis. But there'll be 6 million blind Americans just from not tackling the diabetes epidemic, as I urged us to do when I ran in 2016. Yeah. So we have to get behind these health and these financial issues to save our country and all that we love about it.
Yes.
So anyway, that's kind of my message tonight about the fact that the truth movement is sort of winning with some of these remarkable books that some of my friends and colleagues and even lifelong allies have produced. Mm-hmm. Let's all do that. Let's only talk about what we know. Because remember, knowledge trumps belief, but experience trumps knowledge. So if somebody tries to tell you what their belief is, and that's how the nature of reality is, you say, well, wait a minute. I know that's not true. And besides that, I had experiences that suggest what scientists and other distinguished people think is knowledge is false. Right? So that's why I base my work on experience with a capital E. Experience is the teacher. Okay? Experience is the purpose of life. We're born into the world to have experience. As I've often said, every lifetime is an experiment. And everything is experience, one kind or the other. Okay? So the purpose of this, the U.S. government even knows that we don't die, we reincarnate, and we go back to heaven when we die and then come back to another life, not necessarily a life in linear order with other past lives. And they know that the purpose of life was to kind of open up like a camera shutter and learn things and have experience, and then close again. That's why I knew going into my work that I should just focus on my experience, not what other people were saying about time travel or other people's stories of having time traveled, because I don't know if those happen, because they happen to somebody else.
Right.
But I know what happened to me.
Right.
So that's what the truth movement has to focus on, is experience with a capital E.
Yes. Very good words.
That's what's really broken through with the internet.
Yes.
I think if the government tries to shut down the internet, we should have a revolution. I would state that as my public position on the idea of censoring the internet. There was too much censorship during the virus and the vaccine controversies of the last 2 or 3 years, and it should not continue.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what all these many of these writers sort of derive their knowledge of all this stuff through experience. In other words, like Tina Foster, for example, on The Paul is Dead, she went to all these international experts and analyzed all of the lyrics, and went to the people who could study the original Paul's face with William Campbell's face, and realized that Paul did die. And the other thing is, the truth is coming out. You can go online, I believe, and still see Heather Mills' appearance on that British TV appearance where she said that after Paul's death, she would announce that he was the second Paul McCartney. He was somebody who took the late Paul McCartney's name and became the brilliant musician he is. So we have to kind of wake up and smell the roses, as they say, and embrace the truth wherever our experience takes us. And anyway, that's why I want to talk about these 10 books and these 10 friends and collaborators,
Awesome.
colleagues.
Well, Andy, I really have to thank you for doing this. I know everybody watching this has enjoyed it immensely. I did not get to all the questions. However, a lot of the questions you've answered numerous times in other venues. And some of the questions were about other people. So,
Right. I don't talk about other people. I mean, I've talked about writers here like Alfred Weber or Michael Sell or whatever, just to distinguish the fact that I know all these people and I know their work, and I know that they've released truth, but sometimes they made mistakes. I may be making a mistake about, whether Corey Good's been telling the truth or whoever. We're all fallible. We're human.
Yeah.
Okay?
Right.
But all of them have strived to keep both an open mind and an adult level of not so much skepticism, but discernment. Okay, when you grow up and you move on in life, you are an adult. You're supposed to no longer be an adolescent or a child. Okay? And you're supposed to surrender the things of childhood and adolescence. And that's what I'm afraid not enough people are doing in their discernment on the internet. They're believing anything that's posted on the internet, for example. Well, did they believe everything that was written on the bathroom wall in junior high school? No.
You mean that wasn't true? You mean that wasn't
our dilemma?
I thought the bathroom scribbling was all true. You mean to tell me that it's not true? Oh my goodness.
I'm sorry to say, Aaron, that some of that stuff on the bathroom walls is bullshit.
Oh, good. That's reassuring. That's reassuring.
So the internet has kind of become the new bathroom wall. It's like when somebody becomes a public figure, as I experienced both in terms of my truth campaign and then my presidential campaign, total wackadoodles make all kinds of bizarre, unfounded claims about you that are totally untrue. People believe it. They make accusations against you. They disinvite you from certain conferences, and they start engaging in scuttlebutt on the internet. Well, that person is such and such. Some of those people who spread those rumors are total crazies. and you wouldn't trust in their sense of the truth any more than you would by going into a mental hospital and grabbing somebody and saying, "Is this true?" You're dealing with a lunatic, right? A crazy person. So we have to suspend judgment when evaluations of other individuals are involved. We can gather information and try to connect the dots, such as people have tried with the Clintons. But we should be mindful of the fact that a lot of this stuff that's published is absolute nonsense. It's absolute false accusation. It's defamation of character. And it's not even prosecutable now in our culture, in our legal system, because there's so much of it. I called for an internet court when I was running for president because we would need such a court system to handle all these claims. The copyright theft, the defamation, the false light publicity, the publication of private facts that's going on the internet.
And the censorship of viewpoints should not be happening.
Right, the censorship that is also going on. So that's one of the reasons I'm so concerned about the truth movement as an organic movement. If you look at this pattern of people still not being able to discern true stories, and then also very important discussions being censored, our culture, which sort of advanced a lot by getting on the internet, is now going backwards. And that could be disastrous. It's going backwards by censoring things on the internet. I mean, if you don't believe or agree with what somebody says, you can state your opinion. Okay? I thought there was a healthy debate that was emerging about whether or not to get the jab, as it was being called, the vaccine for COVID-19. I didn't get it. I got the virus, and I'm fine now.
Yeah. Even
though I was in kidney failure. Okay? Now, that's my experience. That's not my advisement to other people what they want to do with their body.
Right.
But there was a healthy, robust debate about both the virus and the vax emerging.
Yeah.
And then we started to see people's posts being taken down in like 15 minutes by a fact checker.
Yeah. Terrible.
That's not America. That's censorship.
Exactly.
That doesn't advance society. And that's what we have to fight. We have to keep the internet open, and net neutrality and the right to post. But if somebody defames somebody unfairly, they should still be liable for defamation of character, and they're not. They're not even being held accountable. That's why all these wackadoodles have gone apeshit in trying to destroy public figures' reputations, because they're just making shit up and they're not being sued.
Right.
So anyway, I'm very dismayed about what the internet has become in the last 25 years or so, last 27 years.
But
it was really a liberating force in the world.
It really was.
And some of the people who brought it about were essentially sort of public geniuses. But it's become a place where all those negative things are going on. The defamation, the copyright theft, the false light publicity. So we have to clean up that act, too, by adhering to the truth.
Yeah.
Not what we think is the truth, not what people tell us is the truth, but what we have experienced or what we have investigated in the kind of long-term, deep political research that some of these writers I've talked about tonight have done.
Yes.
Basically, what used to be called ethical journalism.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that is the fulfillment of the truth, and will be a return to ethical journalism. And we've turned away from ethical journalism because all kinds of falsehoods are being said about not only good Americans, but some heroic and very productive and beneficial Americans. It's happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'll look at a book like Trauma Favor about the Clinton crime syndicate and go, well, are they criminals? Okay, what's the evidence? And really try to evaluate whether they're just as corrupt as most of the politicians or literally criminals. But I know that a lot of public figures have had all kinds of things said about them that are not true.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
I mean, Barack Obama's name is Barry Soetoro.
Mm-hmm.
And, Donald Trump was running for president. and he was using Alex Jones' pronunciation. His name was Barry Sotero. And that's not even his half-sister's name. Her name is Maya Sotoro. I was all over the internet and radio talking about the fact that his Indonesian name was Barry Sotoro. So we've literally had presidential candidates who have won who are not even citing the proper birth names of other presidents. That's a screwed up civilization. And I'm not blaming Mr. Trump for that because we're all in that dilemma together.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again, Andy. And you know what? After more than 3 hours, people want more. They're asking when you're going to come back, and you're certainly welcome.
I'll come back. If you want to cherry pick questions that have been asked I've never addressed or have not addressed a lot.
Okay.
Please have me back on, and I'll be happy to
awesome.
to address those questions. So let's just do a second show where those questions are addressed.
Okay, let's do that real soon. We'll do that. Oh, thank you.
But, if we end up talking about the fact that I found Hillary Rodham a bright and polite and kind young woman, and they start thinking I'm some kind of flack catcher for the Clintons,
right,
just because I was describing my experience of meeting Mrs. Clinton when she was 21 years old and I was 7 years old.
Right.
Okay. And she was in the company of Chris Olson, who became Chris Olson Rogers, and my dean of students and my crim law professor at Lewis and Clark 19 years later. That's all I was saying. And people were saying, oh, he's a Clinton partisan, or he's a flack catcher for the Clinton. No,
yeah.
I was just saying that when I had contact in childhood with Bill and Hillary, they were very nice young people. I don't know what they've become later in life. I don't know them.
Right.
They're public figures I've never met. I've never been at a reception for them. I've never been over to dinner with them, or anything. I just know what they've done in their political careers. But I did meet both of them, and they were very nice young people. And so we have to get beyond the thing where, okay, if you believe Hillary is a monster, if somebody says she wasn't a monster when they met her, that they're working for Hillary or full of BS, or that's not true, or whatever. In other words, we have to contextualize exactly what somebody is saying to evaluate the truth of what they're saying, not disagree with them because we don't like that person. Okay. I mentioned Cliff High saying that I didn't time travel because he doesn't believe in time travel. Well, sorry, Mr. High, we were time traveling.
Yeah.
Right. And the Los Alamos physicists who built the atomic bomb were totally involved. They were doing it. Okay? I time traveled because I was in the program that developed time travel, not because it existed and I had the opportunity to do it. That old Al Bielek type of myth. Okay, so we have to get past that country where so many people are putting their beliefs before their findings rather than they're basing their findings on their beliefs rather than their beliefs based on their findings.
Right.
Our findings of what life includes through our experience matters more than our beliefs. To believe something means to apprehend something in the absence of direct knowledge. By the way, that includes certain forms of religious belief. A belief is not known, is not experienced. It is an apprehension that something exists because you think it does, because it might or it has to. No. What matters is experience, and after experience, generalized knowledge or specific knowledge, and then belief. Many people have that backwards. We have to get beyond that form of religiosity, that form of prejudice.
Right. It's
holding people back in like what Carl Sagan called the demon-haunted world. When somebody says, Andy, you can't have been reincarnated because you remember your past lives. Because we don't have a past life, because we go to heaven or hell when we're judged.
Yeah.
That's what Scripture says. Your past life memories may be from a demon or something. I say, no, that's your belief. I know that we live again, that reincarnation is a reality. And the Department of Defense told me of that when I was a little kid. When they regressed me when I was 9, and I saw myself as that geometry professor at Amherst. I have the name and the secret activities of a number of my past lives. Nothing's been written in books about it, nothing on the internet and so forth. So that's an example that I kind of show in my book about the afterlife.
Awesome.
That experience trumps knowledge and knowledge trumps belief. Okay, so we have to start challenging people when they say, well, that's not my belief. I believe if you're bad, you go to hell. I mean, do you think a just and loving God would damn people to all hell for eternity for having one mistake or one series of mistakes in one life?
No.
Doesn't sound like my God.
No.
Or like Christ. And in fact, Jesus talked about reincarnation when he stated and built a case for the fact that John the Baptist was the reincarnation of the prophet Elijah.
Wow.
And I've had doctrinaire Christians tell me that's not true, and it is true. It's right there in Scripture. I'm not saying that because I believe it. I'm saying that because it's right there in what they agree was Jesus' words. Okay? Mm-hmm. So anyway, we're all going to live again. We're all, each lifetime is an experiment. So do not fear where we're headed. We're headed towards more and more experience and ultimately towards ascension. And exactly what Jesus experienced. That's our ultimate destiny as human beings. And that's not being shared by the U.S. government with the American people, even though they know that that's true. I had people in the DOD and CIA talk about these themes. Oh, don't worry about being killed on Mars, Andy. They can kill your body, but they can't kill your soul. Okay?
Right.
So our government has been holding back the nature of our very lives and our destiny as spirits. Anyway, let me just conclude on that thought tonight.
Okay. Good night, Andy, and thank you again.
Thank you, Aaron, for having me on. Thank you for being a great friend, as you've been in so many ways. God bless you.
God bless you.
I wish you the best. And sure, I'd love to come on to answer any questions that were raised tonight. And I would encourage everybody to think about these 10 books and just recognize the really revolution in consciousness, in bionic, robotic, human body parts, if you will, organs, and in awareness of the economic problems of our government and so forth while we have a chance to do it. So let's move and create a better America.
Excellent words. Good night, everybody. Good night, Andy.
Good night, Aaron.